Welcome, dear listener, to a quiet journey through the halls of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Tonight, we will walk slowly through its ancient corridors, not only to remember its wonders, but to notice the moments when those walls did not shield those within them. As you settle into a comfortable place, let your thoughts soften and allow this story to unfold gently. We will move through years where danger lingered close, where warnings were missed, and where students faced more than they were meant to carry, in a place that was meant to keep them safe. There is a certain belief, repeated often enough that it begins to feel like truth, that Hogwarts is the safest place in the wizarding world. It is spoken by parents as they send their children away for the first time, by professors who have spent their lives within its walls, and by students themselves who learn to trust in the ancient stones beneath their feet. The castle stands high above the surrounding landscape, protected by enchantments layered over centuries, its towers watching over grounds that seem both vast and contained. To those approaching for the first time, it appears less like a school and more like a sanctuary, removed from the uncertainties of the wider world. The protections are, in many ways, remarkable. Apparition is restricted within the grounds, preventing unwanted entry by those who might seek to do harm. The boundaries shift and respond, confusing those who do not belong, turning paths into loops and leading strangers away without their realizing it. Creatures that dwell nearby, even those capable of great violence, are understood to exist within a balance that the school maintains. Professors, many of them among the most skilled witches and wizards of their generation, stand as both teachers and guardians. All of this creates an impression of control, of a place where danger cannot easily reach. Yet beneath this impression, there exists something quieter, something less certain. Protection, as it is practiced at Hogwarts, is not the absence of danger, but the management of it. The castle does not remove risk from the lives of its students. Instead, it contains it, shapes it, and, at times, allows it to remain close enough to be felt. The forest at the edge of the grounds is not sealed away, but acknowledged. The moving staircases do not follow predictable patterns, but continue to shift in ways that can disorient even those familiar with them. The very structure of the school suggests that unpredictability is not an accident, but a feature woven into its design. For a young student arriving for the first time, this distinction is not immediately clear. The journey itself encourages trust. The train ride, filled with laughter and anticipation, leads to boats crossing a still lake beneath the reflection of candlelit windows. The Great Hall welcomes them with warmth, with floating lights and a ceiling that mirrors the sky above. It is easy, in those moments, to believe that the world beyond has been left behind, that whatever dangers exist elsewhere have no place here. But even within these early experiences, there are small indications that safety is not absolute. The stories told by older students often carry a certain edge, hints of things encountered rather than simply imagined, doors that should not be opened, corridors that are best avoided, creatures glimpsed at a distance and not spoken of too loudly. These are not warnings given with urgency, but shared as part of the fabric of life at the school, as though risk is something to be accepted rather than questioned. The adults who oversee this world move with a calm that reinforces this acceptance. They do not speak often of danger, and when they do, it is usually in terms that suggest it is already understood, already accounted for. Their confidence becomes a kind of reassurance, not because it removes uncertainty, but because it teaches students not to dwell on it. When something unusual occurs, it is addressed, contained, and then allowed to fade into the background, another story to be told in quieter moments. Over time, this approach shapes the way students perceive their surroundings. They learn to navigate spaces that are not entirely predictable, to accept that certain risks are simply part of their education. A staircase that leads somewhere unexpected becomes an inconvenience rather than a concern. A distant sound in the night becomes something to ignore rather than investigate. The boundary between what is safe and what is dangerous grows less distinct. Not because the danger has diminished, but because it has become familiar. There is, within this familiarity, a subtle shift. What begins as trust in the institution gradually becomes reliance on it, and reliance carries its own quiet assumptions. If something is allowed to exist within the grounds, then it must be meant to be there. If a threat is not removed, then it must already be understood. These assumptions are rarely spoken aloud, but they guide behavior in ways that are difficult to notice while they are forming. The castle itself reinforces this sense of continuity. Its walls have endured centuries of change, of conflict and resolution, of generations passing through its halls. There is a weight to that history, a suggestion that whatever has come before has been survived, and therefore whatever comes next will be as well. It is a comforting thought, one that allows students to move through their days without constant fear. Yet it is also a thought that can obscure the reality of individual experience, the moments when survival is not guaranteed, when outcomes are uncertain. In this way, Hogwarts becomes something more complex than it first appears. It is not simply a place of safety, nor is it a place of unchecked danger. It exists somewhere between those ideas, holding both at once without fully resolving the tension between them. The protections that surround it are real, but they are not complete. The trust it inspires is genuine, but it is not always justified. For those who live within its walls, this balance is rarely questioned. It becomes part of the rhythm of daily life, as natural as attending lessons or sharing meals in the Great Hall. Only in moments when that balance falters, when something slips beyond control or reveals itself more clearly than before, does the illusion begin to shift. And even then, the response is often to restore the appearance of normalcy as quickly as possible, to return to the belief that the castle will continue to stand between its students and whatever lies beyond. So, the idea remains, repeated and accepted, that Hogwarts is the safest place in the wizarding world. It is a statement that carries comfort, that allows parents to send their children away with a measure of peace, that allows students to rest without constant worry. But within that statement, there is also a quiet omission, an understanding left unspoken. Safety, here, is not the absence of danger, but the belief that danger can be endured, managed, and, if necessary, survived. There is a moment, early in every student's life at Hogwarts, when the future seems to narrow into a single choice. It takes place in the Great Hall, beneath a ceiling that reflects the sky, with hundreds of eyes watching in quiet expectation. One by one, names are called, and each child steps forward to sit upon a simple stool. A hat, worn and ancient, is lowered over their head, and within seconds, a decision is made. It is presented as a formality, a tradition that has endured for generations. Yet the outcome of that moment will shape nearly every part of a student's life that follows. The sorting hat does not simply assign students to houses. It interprets qualities, weighs tendencies, and chooses where each child belongs. Courage, ambition, loyalty, intelligence. These traits, spoken aloud as if they exist in clear and separate forms, become the foundation for identity within the school. The decision is accepted without question, as though it reveals something essential and unchangeable. Applause follows, and the student joins a table that will become their place, their community, their measure of self. For many, this process feels like belonging, to be chosen, to be placed among others who share similar traits, offers a sense of certainty at an age when little else is clear. Friendships form quickly within these boundaries. Common rooms become homes within the larger castle. Rivalries, too, take shape, sometimes playful, sometimes more deeply rooted. The structure appears to bring order, to give students a way to understand themselves and each other. Yet, beneath this order lies a quiet rigidity. The act of sorting suggests that who a student is at 11 years old is sufficient to define who they will become. It leaves little room for growth beyond those initial impressions, little space for qualities that do not fit neatly into one category. A student placed in a house known for bravery may feel compelled to act bravely, even when uncertainty would be wiser. One placed in a house associated with intelligence may measure their worth only through academic success. Over time, these expectations begin to shape behavior as much as reflect it. The divisions between houses, though intended as a means of organization, gradually deepen into something more significant. Competitions are encouraged, points awarded and taken away, victories celebrated as belonging to one group rather than the whole. The house cup, displayed at the end of each year, becomes a symbol not just of achievement, but of comparison. Success for one house is framed as loss for another. What begins as a game carries an undercurrent of separation. Among these divisions, some become more pronounced than others. Certain houses gain reputations that extend beyond simple traits. They become associated with particular kinds of people, particular paths in life. Students entering those houses inherit not only a place to sleep and study, but a history that follows them. In some cases, this history becomes a burden. Assumptions are made before a word is spoken, expectations set before any choice is freely made. This is felt most strongly by those placed into houses that carry negative associations. For them, the sorting hat's decision can feel less like belonging and more like judgment. They are viewed through the lens of what their house represents, rather than who they are as individuals. Teachers, consciously or not, may treat them differently. Peers may approach them with caution or suspicion. Over time, these responses can shape how they see themselves, narrowing their sense of possibility. The system does not require this outcome, yet it allows it to form. There are no mechanisms within Hogwarts that actively challenge these perceptions. No structured effort to remind students that the qualities of one house are not exclusive, that courage can exist alongside ambition, that loyalty can be found in unexpected places. Instead, the boundaries remain in place, reinforced by tradition and habit. For some students, the effects are subtle. They grow comfortable within their assigned identities, rarely questioning them. For others, the experience is more complex. They may feel that they do not fully belong, that the traits used to define their house do not capture the whole of who they are. Yet the structure of the school offers little opportunity to explore that uncertainty. The sorting is permanent, the decision final. There are moments when the limitations of this system become more visible. Students who struggle to meet the expectations of their house may feel isolated, as though they have failed not only themselves but the identity assigned to them. Others may embrace those expectations too fully, allowing them to justify choices that might otherwise be questioned. In both cases, the influence of the sorting extends beyond simple organization, shaping thought and action in ways that are not always beneficial. The adults who oversee this process rarely intervene. The sorting hat is treated as an authority beyond question, its decisions accepted as wise and necessary. There is comfort in this belief, in the idea that such an ancient artifact understands what others cannot. Yet this acceptance also removes responsibility from those who might otherwise examine the system more closely. If the sorting is correct by definition, then its consequences need not be addressed. Over time, the divisions it creates become part of the school's identity. They are woven into its stories, its traditions, its sense of continuity. Students learn not only their lessons in magic, but their place within this structure. They come to see themselves as members of a house first, individuals second, and the distinction grows more significant with each passing year. In this way, the sorting system, though presented as a simple beginning, becomes something far more enduring. It offers belonging, but also limitation. It creates community, but also separation. It defines, but does not always understand. And in doing so, it shapes the lives of students in ways that extend far beyond that single moment beneath the enchanted ceiling. When a choice was made for them, before they had the chance to make one for themselves. At the edge of the Hogwarts grounds, where the maintained lawns give way to shadow and uneven earth, there stands a boundary that is spoken of often, yet rarely enforced in the way one might expect. The Forbidden Forest begins not with a wall or a gate, but with a gradual darkening, a thickening of trees whose branches knit together until the light itself seems to hesitate before entering. Students are warned about it from their first days at the school. They are told, in clear and simple terms, that it is not a place meant for them. And yet, despite these warnings, the forest remains close, visible from windows, accessible from the grounds, its presence constant and quietly accepted. Within its depths live creatures that are not merely unpredictable, but dangerous in ways that even experienced witches and wizards approach with caution. There are beings capable of thought and reason, some indifferent to human presence, others less so. There are creatures driven by instinct, by hunger, by territorial defense. Some have histories intertwined with the wizarding world, agreements made and broken over generations. Others exist outside such arrangements, their existence alone enough to mark the forest as a place where control is limited at best. For the students, the forest becomes a kind of distant reality. It is something they can see but not fully understand, something that exists alongside their daily lives without ever quite being part of them. Stories circulate, pass between older students and younger ones in hushed voices. Glimpses are described, shadows moving between trees, sounds heard at night that cannot easily be explained. These stories do not carry the urgency of immediate danger, but rather the quiet weight of something acknowledged and set aside. What is less often considered is how close this danger truly is. The forest is not separated from the school by distance that ensures safety. It lies just beyond the grounds, its edge within walking reach, its presence impossible to ignore. The line between safety and risk is drawn not by barriers, but by expectation, by the assumption that students will obey the warnings given to them. This assumption, while convenient, leaves much to chance. There are moments when that line is crossed, not always by accident. Detention, as it is practiced at Hogwarts, sometimes brings students into direct contact with the forest. What is presented as punishment becomes exposure to an environment filled with unknown threats. The reasoning behind such decisions is rarely explained in detail. It is treated as part of the school's traditions, an extension of discipline rather than a question of safety. For a young student, being sent into the forest at night is not simply an unpleasant experience. It is an encounter with fear in its most immediate form. The darkness is complete in a way that the castle never allows. The sounds are unfamiliar, each one carrying the possibility of something unseen moving closer. The presence of an adult, while intended to provide guidance, does not remove the underlying risk. The forest does not change because a teacher is present. It remains what it is, indifferent to the intentions of those who enter it. In one such instance, students were tasked with following a trail left by something that had already proven dangerous. The goal was not merely to observe, but to track, to move deeper into the forest in search of a creature capable of harm. The decision to assign such a task, particularly to those still learning the most basic forms of magic, reflects a certain acceptance of risk that is woven into the structure of the school. It suggests that exposure to danger is considered, in some way, a part of learning. Yet this exposure is not always balanced with preparation. Students are not trained to handle every threat they might encounter. Their understanding of magical creatures is often theoretical, based on lessons that do not fully capture the unpredictability of real encounters. When placed in situations where theory meets reality, they are left to respond with whatever knowledge and instinct they possess, guided as much by fear as by training. The forest itself does not distinguish between those who enter it by choice and those who do so as part of their schooling. Its inhabitants respond according to their own nature. To them, a student is not a learner, but a presence, sometimes an intrusion. The agreements that exist between certain magical communities and the school offer some degree of stability, but they are not absolute. Not every creature within the forest is bound by such understandings, and even those that are may not always act predictably. Over time, the presence of the forest becomes normalized within the life of Hogwarts. It is spoken of as a place to be avoided, yet it remains part of the landscape students inhabit. Its dangers are acknowledged, but not removed. This creates a quiet contradiction. A school that is meant to protect its students allows one of its most hazardous elements to remain not just nearby, but integrated into its routines. For many, this contradiction goes unnoticed. The forest is simply there, as it has always been, a part of the world, rather than a problem to be solved. But for those who find themselves within it, even briefly, the experience can alter their understanding of what the school represents. The sense of safety that once seemed certain becomes less clear, replaced by the awareness that danger is not always kept at a distance. There is a difference between teaching students about the world and placing them directly in its most uncertain spaces. The former allows for understanding to grow gradually, guided by knowledge and preparation. The latter introduces risk without the same foundation, relying on the hope that experience itself will serve as a lesson. At Hogwarts, the line between these approaches is not always clearly defined, and so the forest remains, its shadows stretching just beyond the reach of the castle's light. It stands as a reminder that the boundaries of safety are not as fixed as they appear, that even within a place designed for learning, there are elements that exist beyond control. For the students who pass through those years, it becomes part of their story, a presence that lingers at the edge of memory, marking the place where warning and reality quietly meet. There are moments in the history of Hogwarts when danger is not something that slips quietly past its defenses, but something that is placed deliberately within its walls. These moments are often justified by necessity, by the belief that certain objects or knowledge must be kept hidden from the wider world. Yet in choosing the school as a place of concealment, a different kind of risk is created, one that does not come from outside forces, but from the decision itself. One such moment begins with an object of immense power, something sought by those who wish to extend life beyond its natural limits. It is not hidden in a distant vault or protected by layers of secrecy far removed from ordinary life. Instead, it is brought into Hogwarts, placed within a series of defenses designed not only to protect it, but to test those who might attempt to reach it. The reasoning behind this choice rests on a quiet assumption that the school, with all its enchantments and oversight, will serve as a sufficient barrier against those who would misuse such power. The protections themselves are intricate, each one crafted by a different mind, reflecting a different understanding of magic and challenge. There is a creature placed as a guard, massive and imposing, whose presence alone is meant to deter intrusion. Beyond it lie obstacles that require knowledge, skill, and, in some cases, a willingness to take risks that few would consider safe. A tangle of living plants that constrict those who struggle against them. A chamber filled with winged keys, demanding speed and precision. A game of strategy played with pieces that can strike with force. A series of potions, only one of which allows passage forward, the others carrying consequences that could prove severe. Each of these defenses is impressive in isolation. Together, they form a path that is meant to be nearly impossible to traverse. Yet within their design lies an assumption that is not fully examined. They are constructed with the idea that only those of significant power and intent would attempt to pass them, that those within the school, particularly its students, would remain outside this sequence entirely. It is a belief that relies not on barriers, but on expectation. For the students, knowledge of these protections is not entirely hidden. Clues are left in places where they can be found, hints embedded in conversations and observations. The presence of something unusual within the school becomes a subject of curiosity, something to be understood rather than avoided. In an environment where learning is encouraged, where questioning is seen as a strength, it is perhaps inevitable that some will seek to uncover what lies behind these layers. What follows is not a sudden breach, but a gradual movement toward the hidden. Students begin to piece together fragments of information, connecting what they have seen with what they suspect. The obstacles, though designed to be formidable, are not beyond their reach. They are puzzles, in a sense, challenges that can be approached with logic, with cooperation, with determination. In solving them, the students demonstrate qualities that the school itself values: intelligence, bravery, persistence. Yet in doing so, they are placed in situations that carry real danger. The creature that guards the first chamber does not distinguish between those who seek knowledge and those who intend harm. The plants that entangle do not release without consequence. The game that must be played is not symbolic, but physical, its pieces capable of striking with enough force to cause injury. Each step forward requires not only skill, but a willingness to accept risk that exceeds what should reasonably be expected of those still learning the basics of magic. The presence of these dangers within the school raises a quiet question. Why were they placed here at all, within reach of those who are not yet prepared to face them? The answer lies partly in trust, in the belief that the system itself will prevent access, that the sequence of obstacles will act as a barrier not just to those outside, but to those within. Yet this trust does not account for curiosity, for the natural inclination of students to explore what is hidden. There is also the matter of oversight. The adults responsible for these protections are aware of their existence, aware of the risks they carry. Yet their attention is divided, their focus drawn to larger concern. The possibility that students might become involved is not treated with urgency, perhaps because it seems unlikely, perhaps because it is easier to assume that the boundaries will hold. When those boundaries fail, the response is not immediate. The movement through the obstacles is not detected until it is already well underway. By the time the truth becomes clear, students have already placed themselves in direct proximity to the object being protected and to the threat that seeks it. The situation becomes one of reaction rather than prevention, of addressing consequences rather than avoiding them. In the end, the object is not taken by those who would misuse it, but the path to that outcome is marked by moments that could have led elsewhere. The students involved face dangers that extend beyond their training, relying on instinct and cooperation to navigate challenges that were never meant for them. Their success does not erase the risks they encountered, nor does it fully address the decision that allowed those risks to exist in the first place. What remains is a subtle shift in understanding. The school, which is meant to guide and protect, has also become a place where danger can be deliberately introduced, justified by intentions that do not fully consider those most affected. The protections that surround Hogwarts are strong, but they are not always directed in ways that prioritize the safety of its students. Sometimes they are focused outward, on threats beyond the walls, while the risks within go unexamined. And so, the castle continues, its halls unchanged, its routines intact. The object is removed, the immediate danger resolved, and life returns to its familiar patterns. Yet the memory of what occurred lingers, not as a loud warning, but as a quiet acknowledgement that even within a place of learning, choices can be made that place students in harm's way, not by accident, but by design. There are dangers that arrive at Hogwarts from beyond its walls, and there are dangers that take shape quietly within them. Some are loud and visible, announced through disruption and fear. Others remain hidden, concealed beneath ordinary routines, passing unnoticed through the rhythms of daily life. It is often the latter that linger the longest, not because they are more powerful, but because they are not recognized for what they are until it is too late. Among the staff of the school, there is an expectation of trust. Professors are not only teachers, but guardians, figures whose presence reassures students that the world is understood and managed. Their authority is rarely questioned, their actions accepted as part of the structure that holds the school together. This trust forms the foundation of Hogwarts itself, allowing it to function as a place where knowledge is shared and safety is assumed. Yet this foundation depends on something fragile. It assumes that those placed in positions of responsibility are as they appear, that their intentions align with the role they are given. When that assumption is tested, the consequences are not immediately visible. They unfold slowly, woven into the ordinary interactions that define each day. There was a year when one such figure moved through the halls with quiet uncertainty, his manner marked by nervousness, his presence easily overlooked. He was not regarded with suspicion, but with a kind of mild concern, the sort that fades quickly in a place where eccentricity is not unusual. His lessons were delivered without incident, his role fulfilled in a way that did not draw attention. To the students, he was simply another professor, one among many. What remained unseen was not his demeanor, but what lay beyond it. Beneath the surface of his presence was something far more dangerous than any creature or object that could be locked away. It was a presence that did not belong to him alone, a force that had entered the school not through open confrontation, but through concealment. It did not announce itself, did not disrupt the routines of the castle. Instead, it waited, moving through the year without revealing its full intent. The protections that guarded Hogwarts were designed to prevent intrusion, to keep out those who might seek to harm. They were strong, layered, and ancient, yet they did not account for a threat that entered willingly, that was invited inside, that became part of the structure it was meant to protect. The danger was not breaking in, it was already there. For the students, there was little to indicate what was unfolding. Lessons continued, meals were shared, friendships formed, and shifted as they always had. The presence of their professor, though unusual in small ways, did not suggest the scale of what he carried. Trust, once given, does not easily dissolve. It requires evidence, and in its absence, it remains intact even when it should begin to falter. There were moments, small and scattered, that hinted at something not quite right. A hesitation in speech, a glance that lingered too long, an absence of confidence that seemed out of place in someone entrusted with teaching. These details, taken individually, did not form a pattern. They were noticed, perhaps, and then set aside, absorbed into the broader understanding that not all professors are the same. What makes such a situation more unsettling is not simply that it occurred, but that it went unnoticed for so long. The school, with all its awareness and experience, did not perceive the presence of what had entered it. The adults, skilled and observant in many ways, did not uncover what was hidden until the moment it could no longer remain concealed. The systems in place, designed to ensure safety, did not extend to the kind of threat that could wear a familiar face. When the truth finally emerged, it did so not through careful observation, but through confrontation. The hidden presence revealed itself only when it was ready to act, when the time for concealment had passed. By then, the danger had already taken root within the school, moving closer to its goal with each passing day. For the students who found themselves at the center of this revelation, the experience reshaped their understanding of the world around them. The idea that danger could exist so close, so quietly, challenged the sense of safety that had been assumed. The realization that a figure of authority could harbor such a threat altered the meaning of trust itself. The failure, in this case, was not one of intention, but of awareness. The school did not choose to allow such a presence within its walls. It simply did not recognize it. The distinction, while important, does not lessen the impact. When danger is not seen, it cannot be addressed. When it is allowed to remain, even unknowingly, it becomes part of the environment it inhabits. In the aftermath, the immediate threat was removed, its presence no longer hidden, its influence ended. The routines of the school resumed, the structure restored to what it had been. Yet the memory of what had occurred remained, not always spoken of directly, but present in the quiet understanding that not all dangers announce themselves. There is a difference between guarding against what is known and preparing for what is not. Its protections are built around the threats it understands, the patterns it has encountered before. But when faced with something that moves outside those patterns, that takes shape in unexpected ways, its defenses become less certain. And so, within the steady rhythm of lessons and seasons, there remains an unspoken awareness that safety, while carefully constructed, is not absolute. That trust, while necessary, is not without risk. And that even in a place defined by knowledge and protection, there are moments when what is most dangerous is not what approaches from outside, but what is already within, waiting quietly to be seen. There are dangers that arrive from distant places, carried by intention and planning, and there are dangers that appear suddenly, without warning, in spaces that should feel familiar. The difference between them is not always in their severity, but in the way they are understood. A threat from outside can be anticipated, prepared for, spoken about in careful terms. A threat that emerges within the walls of a school carries a different weight, one that unsettles, not because it is unknown, but because it should not have been possible. On one particular evening, the rhythm of Hogwarts shifted in a way that no one had expected. The castle, which had settled into its usual routines, was interrupted by the presence of something that did not belong. A creature, large and violent, had entered the building, moving through its corridors with the kind of force that leaves little room for subtlety. The announcement that followed was urgent, but not immediate. By the time students were told to return to their dormitories, the danger had already begun to move through the spaces they occupied. The response, though well-intentioned, revealed a certain hesitation. Instructions were given, but they were broad, lacking the clarity that such a situation demanded. Students were told where to go, but not always how to get there safely. Corridors that moments before had been filled with conversation became pathways of uncertainty, each turn carrying the possibility of encountering something that should have been contained long before it reached this point. Among those affected were students who found themselves separated from the safety of their groups. In the confusion that followed the announcement, not everyone was accounted for. Some were left in places that had not yet been secured, unaware of the proximity of the danger. The creature, driven by instinct rather than intent, did not distinguish between those it encountered. Its presence alone was enough to transform a familiar space into something unpredictable. The delay in response is what stands out most clearly. The creature had entered the school, yet its movement was not immediately traced. Its location not confirmed with certainty, the knowledge of its presence did not translate into immediate control. Instead, there was a gap, a period during which the danger existed without clear direction, moving through the castle while those responsible for addressing it worked to understand where it had gone. For the students who encountered it directly, this gap became something far more immediate. They were not observers, but participants in a situation they had not been prepared to face. The lessons they had received did not extend to this kind of moment, where fear must be balanced with action, where the absence of guidance leaves only instinct to follow. The creature itself was not subtle. Its size and strength made it impossible to ignore, its presence overwhelming in a way that few experiences could match. What is striking is not only that the encounter occurred, but that it required students to respond in the absence of adult intervention. The structure of the school, which is meant to provide guidance and protection, was momentarily out of reach. The responsibility for survival, even if only for a brief time, shifted to those who were not yet ready to bear it. When the situation was eventually resolved, it was done so with efficiency, the creature subdued, the immediate threat removed. The castle returned to its routines with a sense of relief, the disruption treated as an isolated incident rather than a reflection of a deeper vulnerability. The narrative that followed emphasized the resolution, the restoration of order, rather than the conditions that had allowed the danger to emerge in the first place. Yet the questions remain. even if they are not often spoken aloud. How did such a creature enter the school without detection? Why was the response not immediate, not precise in a way that could have prevented students from being placed in harm's way? What does it mean for a place defined by its protections to experience such a breach from within? For those who lived through it, the memory does not fade entirely. It becomes part of their understanding of the school, a moment when the illusion of complete safety shifted, even if only slightly. The corridors, once seen as secure, carry a different meaning when one has walked them, knowing that something dangerous moved through them unchecked. The adults who oversee the school continue their work, their confidence largely unchanged. They understand that no system is without flaws, that no protection is absolute. Yet, this understanding does not always translate into visible change. The routines remain, the structure intact, the belief in safety largely preserved. In this way, the incident becomes something both acknowledged and set aside. It is remembered, but not dwelled upon. It is understood, but not fully examined. The balance between safety and risk, already present within the school, is momentarily disrupted and then restored, as though the interruption itself were only a brief deviation from the norm. But for a student, even a brief deviation can alter perception. The realization that danger can appear so suddenly, so close, leaves an impression that does not entirely disappear. It lingers in small ways, in the awareness that protection is not always immediate, that response is not always certain, and that even within the walls of Hogwarts, there are moments when safety must be found rather than assumed. And so the castle continues, its corridors filled once more with the quiet movement of students and the steady presence of those who guide them. The creature is gone, the threat removed, but the memory remains, a quiet reminder that even the most familiar places can change without warning, and that within those changes, students may find themselves facing more than they were ever meant to encounter. Within the structure of Hogwarts, discipline is treated as both guidance and correction, a way to shape behavior and maintain order among students who are still learning not only magic, but responsibility. Most of the time, this discipline takes familiar forms. Points are taken, privileges are removed, expectations are restated with quiet firmness. These responses are understood, even accepted, as part of life within the school. They carry consequences without placing students in situations that exceed what they are meant to endure. Yet there are moments when punishment takes a different shape, one that blurs the line between correction and exposure. Detention, in its more severe form, does not always remain within the boundaries of safety that might be expected. Instead of removing a student from harm, it sometimes places them closer to it, as though risk itself is being used as a lesson. The reasoning behind such decisions is not always made explicit. It is often framed as tradition, as a continuation of practices that have existed for years, perhaps even generations. There is an assumption that discomfort, even fear, can serve a purpose. That by confronting something difficult, a student may learn something lasting. This idea, while not without merit in certain contexts, becomes more complex when the difficulty in question carries genuine danger. For a student assigned to such a detention, the experience begins with uncertainty. The nature of the task is not always clear, only that it lies beyond the ordinary boundaries of school life. The familiar spaces of the castle are left behind, replaced by environments that are less controlled, less predictable. The presence of a supervising adult offers some reassurance, but it does not remove the underlying reality of where they have been sent. There is a difference between learning about danger and being placed directly within it. In lessons, risks are explained, demonstrated in ways that allow for understanding without immediate consequence. In detention, however, the lesson is often the experience itself. The student is expected to navigate a situation not as an observer, but as a participant, to respond in real time to whatever unfolds. This approach carries a quiet assumption that the presence of an adult, combined with the resilience of the student, will be enough to prevent harm. It suggests a confidence in the ability to manage risk, to intervene if necessary, to ensure that the experience remains within certain limits. Yet this confidence does not always account for the unpredictability of the environment or the limitations of those involved. In some cases, the task assigned during detention involves interaction with elements that are not fully controlled, creatures that exist beyond the structured environment of the classroom, spaces that are not designed for safe exploration, situations where the outcome depends as much on chance as on preparation. The student, still in the early stages of learning, is expected to move through these circumstances with a level of composure that may not yet be fully developed. The impact of such experiences is not always immediate. For some, the memory becomes a story, something to be shared later with a mixture of relief and quiet pride. For others, it leaves a deeper impression, a sense that the boundaries of safety are not as firm as they once believed. The lesson, whatever its intention, is not always the one that was meant to be taught. There is also the question of proportion. Discipline is meant to address behavior, to guide a student toward better choices. When the response to a mistake involves exposure to genuine danger, the connection between action and consequence becomes less clear. The focus shifts from understanding what was done wrong to simply enduring what follows. The purpose of the punishment becomes obscured by the nature of the experience itself. The adults who assign such detentions often do so without visible hesitation. Their familiarity with the school, their understanding of its rhythms and its risks, may lead them to view these situations as manageable. What is unfamiliar to a student may seem routine to them, a part of the environment that has always existed. This difference in perspective creates a gap, one where the experience of the student is not fully aligned with the intention of the adult. Over time, these practices become part of the culture of the school. They are not questioned often, not examined in a way that might lead to change. They are accepted, as many traditions are, because they have always been there. The line between discipline and danger remains blurred, not through deliberate choice, but through a gradual acceptance of what is. For the students, the effect is subtle but lasting. They learn that mistakes can lead not only to correction, but to situations where their safety is not guaranteed. They come to understand that authority does not always equate to protection, that guidance can sometimes take them into places where they must rely on themselves more than they expected. This understanding does not always diminish their trust in the school, but it alters it. It introduces a quiet awareness that safety is not absolute, that even within a structured environment, there are moments when the responsibility for navigating risk falls upon them. It is a lesson learned not through instruction, but through experience, one that remains with them long after the detention itself has ended. And so, within the broader life of Hogwarts, detention becomes something more than a simple consequence. It becomes a reflection of how the school balances discipline and safety, how it defines the limits of what students are expected to face. In those moments when the balance shifts too far, when punishment becomes exposure, the purpose of the lesson is overshadowed by the reality of the risk, and the students are left to carry the weight of an experience that was never meant to reach so far beyond the boundaries of learning. There are some dangers that are not unknown, not hidden in the sense of being entirely forgotten, but instead exist as part of the school's distant memory. They are spoken of in fragments, in stories that are half dismissed and half remembered, carried forward without ever being fully examined. Over time, these stories lose their urgency. They become something closer to legend than warning, their details softened by repetition, their meaning blurred by uncertainty. Among these was the idea of a hidden place within the castle, a chamber said to have been created long ago, tied to the intentions of one of the school's founders. The story suggested that it had once been opened, that something within it had caused harm, and that the threat had been contained. Yet the conclusion of that earlier event did not bring clarity, it brought silence. The truth of what had happened was never fully shared, and the memory of it was allowed to fade into something less concrete. This absence of clear understanding created a quiet gap in the school's awareness. The chamber was known, but not investigated. Its existence was acknowledged, but not treated as an active concern. The assumption, unspoken but widely accepted, was that whatever danger had once been present was no longer capable of returning. The past was seen as separate from the present, its consequences already resolved. When the signs began to appear again, they did not immediately disrupt this assumption. The first incidents were not clearly understood. Students were found in states that could not easily be explained, their bodies unchanged yet unresponsive, as though something had passed through them without leaving a visible mark. The cause was uncertain, the pattern unclear. It did not resemble any known threat in a way that demanded immediate recognition. The response from the school was cautious, but not decisive. Investigations were mentioned, efforts made to understand what was happening, yet the scale of the response did not match the severity of the situation. Classes continued, routines remained in place, and the sense of normalcy was preserved as much as possible. There was an effort to reassure, to suggest that whatever was occurring would soon be resolved. As more incidents followed, the pattern became more difficult to ignore. The number of those affected increased, the sense of unease growing quietly among the students. Conversations shifted, moving from curiosity to concern, yet the structure of the school did not change in a way that reflected this shift. There was no clear escalation in protective measures, no immediate move to remove students from potential harm. The knowledge that the chamber had once been opened did not translate into immediate action. The connection between past and present remained uncertain, treated as a possibility rather than a conclusion. This hesitation allowed the situation to continue, the danger persisting within the school, while efforts to identify it moved at a measured pace. For the students, this created a sense of uncertainty that was difficult to define. The threat was not visible, not something that could be easily avoided. It moved through the school without clear pattern, affecting individuals without warning. The usual understanding of safety, based on visible boundaries and known risks, did not apply. There was no clear place to stand, no simple way to remain outside its reach. The adults responsible for the school were not unaware of what was happening. They recognized the seriousness of the situation, yet their response remained constrained by uncertainty. Without a clear understanding of the cause, their actions were limited, focused on maintaining order while seeking answers. This approach, while understandable, left a gap between awareness and protection. There is a difference between not knowing and not acting. In this case, the two became closely intertwined. The absence of complete knowledge led to a delay in decisive action, and during that delay, students continued to be placed at risk. The school remained open, its routines largely unchanged, even as the number of those affected grew. The presence of a known threat, one that had existed within the school's history, made this situation more complex. It was not an entirely new danger, but one that had been allowed to remain unresolved in a deeper sense. The lack of clarity surrounding its origin and nature meant that when it returned, the school was not prepared to respond with certainty. For those who experienced the effects directly, the consequences were immediate and profound. They were removed from the flow of daily life, placed in a state that left them unable to understand or respond. Their absence was felt, not only by those who knew them, but by the school as a whole. Each new incident carried with it the weight of what had come before, a growing awareness that something within the castle itself was not as it should be. The eventual understanding of the threat did not come quickly. It required observation, deduction, and a willingness to look beyond the assumptions that had guided the school's response. When the truth began to take shape, it revealed not only the nature of the danger, but the extent to which it had been allowed to persist. The chamber, once treated as a distant story, was no longer abstract. It was real, its presence confirmed not through legend, but through consequence. The threat within it had not been removed in the past, only contained in a way that did not prevent its return. The failure to fully address it had allowed it to remain, waiting for the conditions that would bring it forward again. In the end, the danger was confronted, the source identified, and the immediate threat brought to an end. The students affected were restored, the routines of the school resumed, and the sense of normalcy gradually returned. Yet beneath that return, there remained a quiet recognition of what had occurred. The school had known, in some form, that the danger existed. When the threat returned, the response had been shaped by uncertainty, by hesitation, by the weight of incomplete understanding. During that time, students were left vulnerable, their safety dependent not on prevention, but on eventual discovery. And so the story of the chamber remains, not only as a tale of hidden spaces and ancient intentions, but as a reminder of what can happen when knowledge is left unresolved. When something is known but not fully understood, acknowledged but not addressed, it does not disappear. It lingers, waiting quietly until the moment when it is no longer possible to ignore. There are threats that move through the open, visible, and unmistakable. And there are others that exist just beyond perception, leaving behind only the faintest trace of their passing. The difference between them is not always in their nature, but in how they are understood. When a danger cannot be clearly seen, when its form remains uncertain, it becomes something more difficult to confront. It lingers in the spaces between explanation and fear, shaping behavior without ever fully revealing itself. Within the walls of Hogwarts, there came a time when such a presence moved freely, not hidden in the sense of being absent, but concealed by the limits of understanding. The signs were there, though they did not immediately form a clear picture. Students were found in states that defied simple explanation, their bodies untouched, yet unresponsive, as though something had reached them without leaving a mark. There were no witnesses, no clear patterns that could be followed with certainty, only the growing awareness that something within the school was acting without being seen. The nature of this threat made it particularly difficult to address. It did not behave in ways that aligned with known dangers, at least not in any way that was immediately recognized. There were no visible attacks, no direct confrontations. Instead, there was absence, a sudden stillness where life had been, followed by confusion and quiet fear. Each new incident deepened that uncertainty, expanding the space between what was known and what was assumed. The school continued, its routines intact, its structure unchanged. Yet beneath this continuity, something had shifted. The sense of safety that had once been taken for granted became less certain, not through any single moment, but through the accumulation of small, unresolved events. What makes such a situation more troubling is not only the presence of the threat, but the way it is allowed to persist. The absence of clear understanding leads to a delay in response, and within that delay, the danger continues its quiet movement. The assumption that the school's protections are sufficient creates a kind of stillness, a reluctance to act without certainty. Yet certainty, in this case, does not come quickly. The creature responsible for these events did not move through the school in a way that could be easily traced. Its path was hidden, its presence felt only in its effects. This allowed it to remain within the castle for an extended period, moving through spaces that should have been secure, encountering students who had no way of recognizing the risk until it was already upon them. There is a particular kind of vulnerability that comes from not knowing how to protect oneself. When a threat is visible, even if it is dangerous, there are ways to respond, to avoid, to defend. When it is unseen, when its nature is not understood, those options become limited. Students, still learning the foundations of magic, were left in a position where their knowledge did not match the reality they faced. The adults responsible for the school were not indifferent to what was happening. They recognized the seriousness of the situation, yet their actions remained measured, constrained by the need to understand before acting. This approach, while grounded in caution, allowed the threat to continue. Each new incident added to the urgency, yet the response did not fully shift to match it. There were no immediate measures that removed students from potential harm. The school remained open, its daily life continuing alongside the unfolding danger. This decision reflected a belief, perhaps unspoken, that the situation could be managed without disrupting the structure of the institution. It suggested a confidence that answers would come before the consequences grew too severe. Yet, for those within the school, the consequences were already present. The absence of those affected was felt, their silence marking the spaces they had once occupied. The uncertainty surrounding their condition added to the sense of unease, creating a quiet tension that moved through the corridors, unspoken but understood. The eventual recognition of the threat did not arrive all at once. It came through observation, through the careful gathering of details that, when placed together, began to form a clearer picture. The nature of the creature, its method of movement, the conditions under which it acted, all of these elements emerged gradually, revealing a danger that had been present all along, waiting to be seen. What becomes clear in this unfolding is not only the nature of the threat, but the limitations of the response. The school, for all its knowledge and experience, did not identify the danger quickly enough to prevent harm. The creature moved through its halls, unchallenged for a time, its presence only understood after it had already acted. There is a difference between reacting to danger and preventing it. In this case, the balance leaned toward the former. The actions taken were effective once the truth was known, but the time it took to reach that understanding allowed the threat to persist longer than it should have. During that time, students were left exposed, their safety dependent not on prevention, but on eventual discovery. When the situation was finally resolved, when the creature was confronted and its movement brought to an end, the immediate sense of danger faded. The students who had been affected were restored, the routines of the school resumed, and the structure that had seemed uncertain returned to its familiar form. Yet, the memory of what had occurred did not disappear entirely. It remained as a quiet recognition of the gap between expectation and reality. The belief that the school could protect its students had not been entirely false, but it had not been complete. There were moments when that protection faltered, not through intention, but through the limits of understanding. And so the castle stands, as it always has, its walls unchanged, its routines continuing. But within its history, there are moments that reveal something deeper, something less certain. That even within a place built on knowledge and protection, there are times when danger moves unnoticed, and in those times, the burden of survival falls, even briefly, on those who were never meant to carry it alone. There are times when danger does not come from darkness or secrecy, but from something quieter, something that appears harmless on the surface. It arrives not with fear, but with confidence, with a smile, with a reputation that precedes it. In such moments, the risk is not immediately recognized, because it does not resemble what one expects danger to be. Within Hogwarts, the role of a professor carries a certain weight. It is a position that implies knowledge, capability, and the ability to guide students through complexities they have yet to understand. When a teacher stands at the front of a classroom, there is an unspoken agreement that what they offer is grounded in experience, that their instruction will prepare students for the challenges they may face. There was a year when that agreement was quietly broken, not through malice, but through something perhaps more difficult to address. The individual placed in charge of teaching defense against the darker aspects of magic was known not for mastery, but for stories. His reputation rested on accounts of encounters, on achievements that had been widely shared and rarely questioned. His presence was welcomed, his name recognized, his confidence evident in the way he spoke and carried himself. For the students, this created an expectation. They entered his classroom believing they would learn from someone who had faced danger and overcome it, someone who could guide them with authority and clarity. Yet what they encountered instead was something different, something that did not align with the needs of their education. Lessons became demonstrations not of skill, but of presentation. Stories were told, but they did not always translate into understanding. Practical instruction, which should have formed the foundation of their learning, was limited or absent. The focus shifted from preparation to performance, from knowledge to appearance. Students were given the impression of learning without the substance that would allow them to apply it. At first, this difference may not have been fully apparent. For younger students, the distinction between entertainment and education can be difficult to recognize. The classroom, filled with color and sound, with exaggerated accounts and carefully constructed images, held attention in a way that more grounded instruction might not. It created the sense that something meaningful was happening, even when it was not. Over time, however, the absence of depth became clearer. When faced with tasks that required real understanding, students found themselves uncertain. The skills they had been taught did not extend far beyond the surface, leaving gaps where there should have been confidence. The subject itself, meant to prepare them for situations that could carry real danger, remained largely unexplored in its practical form. What makes this situation more complex is the role of the institution in allowing it to continue. The appointment of such a professor suggests a reliance on reputation rather than verification, on appearance rather than substance. The responsibility for ensuring that students receive proper instruction rests not only with the individual teaching, but with those who place them in that position. The consequences of this decision are not immediate in the way that other dangers might be. They do not manifest as sudden threats or visible harm. Instead, they unfold gradually, shaping what students know and what they do not know. The absence of proper preparation becomes apparent only when it is needed, when the expectation of knowledge meets the reality of its absence. There are moments when this gap becomes visible. Situations arise that require more than words, more than confidence, more than the illusion of skill. In those moments, the lack of genuine understanding is revealed, not only to the students, but to the professor himself. The role he occupies, built on stories rather than substance, cannot sustain the weight placed upon it. For the students, this realization carries its own quiet impact. The trust placed in their teacher is not easily withdrawn, yet it is altered. They begin to understand that not all authority is equal, that not every figure of guidance can provide what is needed. This awareness, while valuable in its own way, comes at a cost, one that is not always acknowledged. The broader effect extends beyond a single classroom. The subject itself, defense against dark magic, is one of the most critical areas of learning within the school. To leave it inadequately taught is to leave students unprepared for realities they may one day face. The failure is not only in what is taught, but in what is left unaddressed. When the truth of the situation becomes clear, when the difference between appearance and reality can no longer be maintained, the response is swift. The illusion dissolves, the role cannot be sustained, and the presence that once filled the classroom with confidence is revealed as something far less certain. Yet by that point, the time has already passed, the opportunity for proper instruction lost. The students move forward, their education continuing under different guidance, but the gap remains. It is not easily filled, not entirely replaced. The lessons that should have been learned during that time must be sought elsewhere, acquired through other means, often under circumstances that carry their own risks. Within the life of Hogwarts, this moment becomes another quiet reminder of the balance between trust and responsibility. The school, in its complexity, depends on both. When one is placed above the other without careful consideration, the result is not always visible at once, but over time, it shapes the experience of those who rely on it, leaving them to navigate the difference between what they were promised and what they were given. There are moments when the nature of a danger becomes understood, when the uncertainty that once surrounded it begins to give way to knowledge. In those moments, a different kind of responsibility emerges. It is no longer a question of what is happening, but of how quickly it can be addressed. The difference between understanding and action, though often small in appearance, can carry consequences that extend far beyond a single decision. Within the walls of Hogwarts, there came a time when the cause of a series of events was finally recognized. The pattern that had once seemed unclear now had shape, its source identified, its effects understood in a way that allowed for a response. There was, at last, a way to reverse what had been done, a method grounded in knowledge rather than assumption. It offered hope, not only for those affected, but for the school as a whole, which had been moving through a period of quiet uncertainty. Yet even with this understanding, resolution did not come immediately. The process required time, preparation, and the gathering of materials that were not readily available. The cure, though known, depended on elements that could not be summoned at will, that needed to be cultivated, grown, and brought to a state where they could be used effectively. This necessity introduced a delay, one that, while perhaps unavoidable, extended the period during which students remained in a state of suspension between harm and recovery. For those who had been affected, this delay carried a different meaning. They existed outside the flow of time as it was experienced by others, their bodies preserved, their presence unchanged. To those around them, however, the passage of days and weeks continued, each one marked by the awareness that a solution existed, yet could not be applied. The knowledge that something could be done, paired with the inability to do it immediately, created a quiet tension that settled over the school. The response from the institution was measured, focused on maintaining stability while the necessary steps were taken. Classes continued, routines were preserved, and the appearance of normalcy was upheld. This approach, while understandable, did not fully reflect the emotional weight of the situation. The absence of those affected was not easily overlooked, their stillness a constant reminder of what had occurred and what had yet to be resolved. There is a particular kind of difficulty in waiting for a solution that is already known. It requires patience, but also trust. Trust that the process will unfold as expected, that no further complications will arise, that the delay will not lead to additional harm. For the students, this trust is not always easy to maintain. Their understanding of time is different, shaped by immediate experience rather than long-term perspective. The idea that a solution exists but cannot yet be used may feel less like reassurance and more like uncertainty. The adults responsible for the school are aware of this, yet their options are limited. The materials required for the cure cannot be accelerated beyond certain natural processes. Attempts to hasten them could compromise their effectiveness, introducing risks that might outweigh the benefit of speed. And so the decision is made to wait, to allow the necessary elements to develop fully, even as the consequences of delay remain present. This decision reflects a balance between caution and urgency, one that is not easily resolved. Acting too quickly could lead to failure, while waiting carries its own cost. In choosing the latter, the school accepts that time itself becomes part of the challenge, that the solution, though certain, is not immediate. It is a choice shaped by knowledge, yet constrained by circumstance. For those observing from within the school, the delay becomes part of the experience. It is discussed in quiet conversations, in the spaces between lessons, in the moments when attention drifts from the present to the unresolved. The affected students remain visible, their condition unchanged, a steady presence that cannot be ignored. They become, in a sense, part of the environment, a reminder of both the danger that has passed and the resolution that has yet to arrive. When the cure is finally ready, when the conditions are met and the process can begin, the transition is swift. The delay, which once seemed so extended, gives way to immediate action. Those who had been affected are restored, their return marking the end of a period that had lingered longer than anyone wished. The relief that follows is quiet but profound, a return not only of individuals, but of a sense of completeness that had been missing. Yet the memory of the delay does not disappear entirely. It remains as part of the understanding of what occurred, a recognition that knowledge alone is not always enough to ensure immediate protection. There are limits, both natural and practical, that shape how and when solutions can be applied. Within those limits, time becomes a factor that cannot be ignored. In the broader life of the school, this moment becomes another layer in its history. It is not marked by a single failure, but by a sequence of decisions, each one shaped by the information available at the time, the recognition of the threat, the identification of the cure, the acceptance of delay. All of these elements combine to form an experience that is both resolved and unresolved at once. The students move forward, their routines restored, their lessons continuing as they always have. But within their memory, there is a quiet awareness of what it means to wait, to know that something can be fixed, and to understand that sometimes, even in a place defined by magic, solutions do not come as quickly as they are needed. There are moments when protection is introduced with the intention of preventing harm, yet carries with it a different kind of consequence, one that is less visible but no less significant. These measures are often justified by necessity, by the belief that a greater danger must be held at bay, and that the means used to do so are acceptable within that context. Yet when those means affect those they are meant to protect, the line between safety and harm becomes less certain. At one point in the history of Hogwarts, such a measure was taken. Creatures were brought to the edges of the school grounds, not as part of the natural environment, but as a deliberate defense. Their presence was meant to serve as a barrier, a way of ensuring that a perceived threat could not reach the students within. They were stationed at key points, their movements watched, their purpose clearly defined. To those who made the decision, it appeared to be a solution grounded in control. Yet the nature of these creatures was not neutral. They did not simply stand guard in the way a wall might, or a spell woven into stone. They carried with them an effect that extended beyond physical presence, something that touched the mind rather than the body. Their proximity altered the atmosphere of the school, not through visible action, but through a gradual shift in feeling, one that was difficult to explain, yet impossible to ignore. For the students, this change was subtle at first. It appeared in moments that could easily be dismissed, a sense of unease that came without clear cause, a quiet heaviness that settled without warning. Over time, these moments became more frequent, more pronounced, shaping the way the school was experienced. The corridors felt different, the air less certain, as though something unseen had entered the space between ordinary thoughts. Some were affected more deeply than others. For certain students, the presence of these creatures brought with it a clarity of memory that was not welcome, a resurfacing of moments that had been set aside, or perhaps never fully understood. The effect was not uniform, but where it took hold, it did so with intensity, drawing attention inward rather than outward, making it difficult to focus on anything beyond the feeling itself. The adults responsible for the school were aware of this effect, at least in part. They understood the nature of the creatures they had chosen to employ, knew that their presence carried consequences beyond simple deterrence. Yet the decision had been made, and with it came the acceptance of those consequences as necessary. The protection offered was seen as outweighing the discomfort it caused. For the students, however, this balance was not easily perceived. They experienced the effect directly, without the context that justified it. What they felt was immediate, personal, and often confusing. It did not resemble a threat that could be faced or avoided. Instead, it settled into their daily lives, altering their experience of the school in ways that could not be addressed through ordinary means. There were moments when this effect became impossible to ignore, instances where students were overcome not by physical harm, but by the weight of what these creatures brought with them. The response in such cases was careful, measured, focused on alleviating the immediate impact. Yet the broader presence remained unchanged, the creatures continuing their watch at the edges of the school. What becomes clear in such a situation is the complexity of using one form of danger to prevent another. The intention behind the decision may be grounded in protection, but the method introduces its own kind of risk, one that is less visible but deeply felt. It is a reminder that not all threats can be countered without consequence, that the act of guarding can itself alter what it is meant to preserve. The students, moving through this environment, learn to adapt in ways that are not formally taught. They find methods of coping, of managing the sensations that arise, of maintaining focus despite the quiet pull of something beyond their control. These adaptations are not part of the curriculum, yet they become part of the experience, shaping how students understand both themselves and the world around them. Over time, the presence of these creatures becomes normalized, not because their effect diminishes, but because it is absorbed into the rhythm of the school. It becomes something to be endured rather than questioned, a background condition that remains even as attention shifts to other matters. The initial awareness fades, replaced by a quieter acceptance. When the time comes for this measure to end, when the creatures are removed and the atmosphere begins to shift once more, the change is noticeable, though not always immediately understood. The heaviness lifts, the sense of unease recedes, and the school returns to something closer to what it had been before. Yet the memory of that period remains, not always in clear detail, but in the way it shaped the experience of those who lived through it. There is a difference between protecting against harm and exposing others to it in a different form. In choosing to bring these creatures to Hogwarts, the school made a decision that reflected both its strengths and its limitations. It sought to guard against one danger, yet in doing so, introduced another, one that was less tangible but no less real. And so, within the broader history of the school, this moment stands as a quiet example of how protection can take unexpected form. It reminds us that safety is not always achieved through force, that the means used to preserve it must be considered as carefully as the threats they are meant to counter. For the students who experienced it, the lesson was not taught in words, but in feeling, in the subtle shift of their surroundings, and in the understanding that even the act of guarding can carry its own weight. There are times when the idea of protection becomes shaped by fear rather than understanding, when the response to a perceived threat grows larger than the threat itself. In such moments, measures are taken not only to prevent harm, but to reassure, to create the appearance of control. Yet when the foundation of those measures is uncertain, the result can be something that neither protects nor clarifies, leaving those within its reach caught between caution and confusion. At Hogwarts, there came a period when the belief in danger centered on a single figure, someone thought to be moving beyond the boundaries of safety, someone whose presence was imagined just outside the reach of the school's protections. The response was swift in intention, but uneven in execution. New restrictions were introduced, additional watchfulness encouraged, and the sense of vigilance within the school grew more pronounced. The castle, which had once felt open in its structure, became more controlled. Movements were observed more closely, routines adjusted in subtle ways. Students were reminded, sometimes directly and sometimes through implication, that the world beyond the walls was not entirely safe, that something existed which required their caution. This awareness settled into the daily rhythm of the school, altering the way students moved through spaces that had once been familiar without question. Yet beneath this heightened vigilance lay a deeper uncertainty. The nature of the threat was not fully understood, its actions not clearly defined. What was known was shaped by assumption, by fragments of information that suggested danger without fully explaining it. This lack of clarity created a gap between the measures taken and the reality they were meant to address. For the students, this gap became a source of quiet tension. They were told to be cautious, yet not always given the means to understand what they were being cautious of. The restrictions placed upon them did not always align with their experiences, creating a sense that something was being held just out of reach of explanation. In this space, imagination began to fill the gaps, often with greater intensity than the truth might have held. There were moments when the protective measures themselves created complications. The increased presence of watchfulness did not always lead to increased safety. In some cases, it introduced new risks, altering the environment in ways that made it more difficult to navigate. The balance between protection and disruption became harder to maintain as the school adjusted to a situation it did not fully control. What makes such a situation more complex is the difference between perception and reality. The figure believed to be a threat was not what he seemed, his presence shaped by misunderstanding rather than intent. Yet the response to him was built on the assumption that the danger was immediate and real. This assumption guided decisions, influenced actions, and shaped the experience of those within the school. The failure, in this case, was not simply one of protection, but of understanding. The measures taken were based on incomplete information, and as a result, they did not address the situation in a way that could bring resolution. Instead, they created a state of ongoing uncertainty, where the sense of danger remained without clear direction. For the students, this uncertainty had a quiet but lasting effect. It altered their sense of the school, introducing an awareness that safety could be disrupted not only by actual threats, but by the perception of them. It revealed that protection, when built on incomplete understanding, can become something less certain, less effective, and at times, more unsettling than the danger it seeks to prevent. There were instances when this confusion became more immediate, when students found themselves in situations shaped by both the perceived threat and the measures taken to counter it. The lines between caution and risk blurred, as actions intended to protect led to circumstances that required careful navigation. In these moments, the absence of clear understanding became more than an abstract concern. It became something that influenced decisions, shaped outcomes, and left students relying on their own judgment in ways they had not expected. The adults responsible for the school continued their efforts, guided by the information they had, adjusting their approach as new details emerged. Yet the process of understanding was not immediate, and during that time, the gap between perception and reality remained. It was only when the truth began to take shape, when the nature of the situation was finally revealed, that the structure of response could begin to align with what was actually needed. By then, the experience had already left its mark. The heightened vigilance, the restrictions, the uncertainty, all of these elements had shaped the way the school was lived in, even if only for a time. The return to normalcy, when it came, did not erase what had been felt. It simply shifted it into memory, a quiet recognition of how easily understanding can be influenced by assumption. In the end, the situation stands as a reminder that protection requires more than action. It requires clarity, an understanding of what is being faced and why. Without that clarity, even well-intentioned measures can fall short, creating a sense of safety that is not fully supported by reality. And so, within the ongoing life of Hogwarts, this moment becomes part of its history, not defined by a single event, but by the space between what was believed and what was true. It is a space where students learned, not through lessons or instruction, but through experience. That safety is shaped not only by what is done, but by how well the world is understood. There are forms of magic that carry a quiet complexity, not because they are difficult to perform, but because of what they allow. They bend the natural flow of time, creating possibilities that extend beyond ordinary experience. Such magic is not widely used, not because it lacks usefulness, but because it requires a level of care that few can maintain without consequence. It is the kind of power that demands understanding not only of how it works, but of when it should not be used. Within Hogwarts, there came a time when this kind of magic was placed into the hands of a student. The intention behind this decision was practical, even thoughtful. There were conflicts within the structure of the school, limitations of time that prevented a student from fully engaging with all that was offered. The solution, as it was conceived, allowed for a way around these limits, a means of extending what could be experienced within the boundaries of a single day. At first, the results seemed beneficial. The student moved through lessons with a precision that suggested discipline and focus, appearing where she was needed, meeting expectations that might otherwise have been impossible to fulfill. To those around her, this appeared as dedication, a reflection of effort rather than the effect of something more complex. Yet beneath this appearance was a growing strain. The act of moving through time in such a way requires constant awareness, a careful attention to detail that leaves little room for rest. Each moment must be managed. Each decision weighed not only against the present, but against the possibility of encountering oneself in a different place, at a different time. The burden of maintaining this balance is not immediately visible, but it accumulates, shaping the experience in ways that are not easily shared. For a student, still in the process of understanding the fundamentals of magic, this responsibility extends far beyond what would normally be expected. It is not simply a matter of learning spells or attending lessons, but of navigating a reality that exists in overlapping layers. The potential for error is constant, and the consequences of such an error are not always clear. This creates a quiet tension, one that exists alongside the ordinary pressures of school life. The adults who permitted this arrangement understood the risks, at least in theory. They were aware of the rules that governed such magic, the need for secrecy, the importance of avoiding interference with the natural course of events. These guidelines were clear, yet the decision to entrust them to a student suggests a belief that they could be followed without deviation. It reflects a confidence not only in the magic itself, but in the individual tasked with using it. What becomes evident over time is that the burden of this confidence rests heavily on the one who carries it. The student must not only succeed in her studies, but also maintain the integrity of the timeline itself, ensuring that each action aligns with what has already occurred. There is little room for uncertainty, little space for the kind of hesitation that might accompany such responsibility. There are moments when this system begins to strain under its own weight. Fatigue sets in, not only from the demands of academic life, but from the constant movement between moments that do not follow a single, linear path. The distinction between one experience and another becomes less clear, as time itself is no longer a steady progression, but something that can be revisited, adjusted, and carefully navigated. In such moments, the risk becomes more apparent. The decision to place such responsibility on a student, regardless of intention, reveals a gap between what is possible and what is appropriate. The magic itself may function as intended, but the experience it creates is not without cost. There comes a point when the use of this power extends beyond its original purpose. Circumstances arise that require more than careful scheduling, more than the quiet repetition of moments. The ability to move through time becomes a means of addressing immediate danger, of altering outcomes that would otherwise remain fixed. In these instances, the stakes shift, and the responsibility grows even greater. For the student involved, this represents a transition from managing time to shaping it, from maintaining balance to influencing events. It is a role that carries consequences not only for herself, but for others, for the sequence of actions that define what has already happened. The awareness of this responsibility adds another layer to the burden, one that cannot be easily set aside. When the need for this power passes, when the circumstances that required it have been resolved, the decision is made to end its use. The tool is removed, the responsibility lifted, and the student returns to a life that follows a single path through time. The change is immediate, yet the experience remains, a memory of what it meant to carry something so complex for so long. What remains, beyond the resolution, is the recognition of what was asked and what was given. The school, in seeking to provide an opportunity, introduced a form of risk that was not immediately visible. It trusted in the ability of a student to manage something that few adults would approach without caution. In doing so, it blurred the line between support and expectation. The use of such magic within Hogwarts becomes another quiet example of how intention and outcome can diverge. The desire to offer more, to extend possibility, does not always align with what is sustainable. For those who experience it, the lesson is not only in what was gained, but in what was carried, in the understanding that even the most controlled forms of magic can shape a life in ways that are not easily measured. And so, within the steady passage of time that defines the school, this moment stands apart, not as a disruption, but as a reflection of how easily the boundaries of responsibility can shift. It reminds us that power, even when used carefully, carries weight, and that placing it in the hands of the unprepared, no matter how capable they may seem, is a choice that leaves its mark long after the magic itself has been set aside. There are moments in the history of Hogwarts when danger is not something that slips quietly into the school, but something that is invited, shaped into a spectacle, and presented as part of tradition. These moments are often framed as opportunities, as experiences meant to challenge and inspire, to connect students with a wider world beyond their own classrooms. Yet within this framing, there exists a tension between what is intended and what is truly at risk. At one point, the decision was made to revive an event that had long been set aside. It was not abandoned without reason. Its history carried with it accounts of injury and loss, outcomes that had led earlier generations to question whether its purpose justified its cost. Over time, it had come to rest as a memory rather than a practice, a tradition remembered but not continued. To bring it back required a shift in perspective, a belief that it could be made safer, that the dangers once associated with it could be controlled. New measures were introduced, safeguards discussed, limitations placed on who could participate. The event was presented not as it had once been, but as something refined, something adjusted to fit within a modern understanding of responsibility. For the students, the announcement carried a sense of excitement. It promised something beyond ordinary lessons, a connection to a broader community, a chance to witness feats of magic that extended beyond their own experience. The idea of competition, of individuals representing their schools, created a sense of anticipation that spread quickly through the halls. Yet beneath this excitement lay the nature of the event itself. The challenges were not simple tests of knowledge or skill. They were designed to push those who participated into situations where danger was real, where success depended not only on ability, but on the capacity to face uncertainty. The tasks were structured in ways that required direct engagement with elements that could not be fully controlled. The presence of such challenges within a school environment creates a quiet contradiction. Hogwarts is, in essence, a place of learning, where students are meant to develop gradually, to build their understanding over time. To introduce an event that places individuals in immediate confrontation with significant risk shifts that balance, even if only temporarily, the safeguards put in place were intended to address this shift. Restrictions on age were established, limits designed to ensure that only those with sufficient experience would take part. The tasks were monitored, overseen by those who believed they could intervene if necessary. These measures were meant to create a boundary between challenge and harm, to allow the event to proceed without repeating the mistakes of the past. Yet safeguards, no matter how carefully designed, depend on the conditions in which they operate. They assume that the system itself will hold, that the rules set in place will not be circumvented, that the environment will remain as controlled as intended. When these assumptions are tested, the effectiveness of those safeguards becomes less certain. For those who participated, the experience was not one of simple competition. It was a series of moments that required immediate response, where preparation met reality in ways that could not be fully anticipated. The tasks demanded more than skill. They required composure in the presence of danger, the ability to act under pressure, to make decisions that carried consequences beyond the immediate. For those who watched, the experience was different, yet still shaped by the nature of what was unfolding. The event was observed, shared, discussed, its challenges becoming part of the collective experience of the school. Yet the distance between observer and participant created a separation, one that allowed the risks to feel less immediate, less personal. There is a subtle shift that occurs when danger is presented as part of a structured event. It becomes something to be witnessed, to be measured, to be compared. The focus moves from the presence of risk to the outcome of the challenge, from the question of safety to the question of success. This shift does not remove the danger, but it alters how it is perceived. Within the life of the school, the event becomes something both extraordinary and unsettling. It stands apart from ordinary lessons, yet it takes place within the same environment, under the same authority. The students move between these realities, from classrooms to challenges, from study to spectacle, without always fully separating the two. What becomes clear over time is that the reintroduction of such an event carries consequences beyond its immediate purpose. It reshapes expectations, alters the sense of what is considered acceptable within the school. It suggests that danger, when framed correctly, can be integrated into the structure of learning, that risk can be managed through intention alone. Yet intention does not always account for what cannot be controlled. The unpredictability of the tasks, the influence of external factors, the possibility of unforeseen outcomes, all remain present beneath the structure that has been created. These elements cannot be entirely removed, no matter how carefully the event is designed. In the end, the event proceeds, its challenges met, its outcomes recorded. The sense of accomplishment, of completion, carries with it a quiet acknowledgement of what has been faced. The school returns to its routines, the event becoming part of its history, something to be remembered and perhaps repeated. But within that memory, there remains a question that is not always asked: whether the presence of such danger within a place of learning serves its purpose, or whether it introduces a risk that extends beyond what is necessary. It is a question that lingers, not always answered, but present in the quiet space between tradition and responsibility. And so, within the ongoing story of Hogwarts, this moment stands as an example of how easily the balance between challenge and safety can shift. It reminds us that even the most carefully structured events carry uncertainties, and that when those events take place within the lives of students, the consequences are not always confined to the boundaries that were intended. There are moments when rules are established with clarity, boundaries drawn to define what is permitted and what is not. These rules are meant to create structure, to ensure fairness, to prevent situations where individuals are placed at risk beyond what is considered acceptable. When such rules are set, there is an expectation that they will hold, that the systems built around them will function as intended. At Hogwarts, during the time of the tournament, one of these rules was particularly clear. Participation was limited, restricted to those who had reached a certain level of maturity, who possessed the experience necessary to face the challenges ahead. This limitation was not arbitrary. It was designed to protect those who were not yet prepared, to ensure that the dangers of the event would not fall upon those still in the earlier stages of their education. Yet despite this clarity, the rule was broken, not through open defiance, but through a process that bypassed the safeguards meant to uphold it. A name appeared where it should not have been, placed into consideration by means that were not fully understood at the time. The system that had been trusted to enforce the boundary had been altered, its function changed in a way that allowed what should have been impossible to occur. For the student whose name was drawn, the moment was not one of choice. It was not the result of ambition or desire, but of circumstance, something imposed rather than pursued. The announcement, made in front of others, carried with it an expectation that could not easily be refused. The structure of the event, bound by its own rules, did not allow for withdrawal. Once the selection was made, it stood as final. This created a situation that revealed a deeper limitation within the system. The rules, though clear, did not account for the possibility of being undermined. They provided no path for correction once the process had been altered. The decision, once announced, was treated as binding, even when the conditions under which it had been made were not as intended. For the student involved, this meant facing challenges that were never meant to be his. The tasks, designed for those with greater experience, became immediate realities, requiring preparation that could not be fully achieved in the time available. The gap between expectation and capability became something to navigate, not through design, but through necessity. The response from the adults within the school reflected both awareness and constraint. They recognized the irregularity, understood that something had gone wrong within the system, yet they did not intervene in a way that altered the outcome. The rules of the tournament were upheld, not because they fully applied, but because there was no clear mechanism to undo what had been done. This adherence to structure, even in the face of its failure, reveals a tension between order and responsibility. The system was designed to protect, yet when it failed, the response was to maintain its authority rather than to adjust it. The student remained bound to the event, his participation no longer a matter of choice, but of obligation. For those observing, the situation carried a different kind of unease. It was not simply the presence of danger, but the recognition that the structures meant to prevent such situations had not functioned as expected. The idea that rules could be circumvented, that safeguards could be bypassed, altered the sense of certainty that the system had once provided. The student himself faced not only the physical challenges of the tournament, but the weight of being placed there without intention. The experience was shaped not by preparation, but by adaptation, by the need to respond to circumstances that had been imposed rather than chosen. Each task carried with it the awareness that it was not meant to be his burden, yet it was one he had to carry. There is a difference between choosing to face danger and being required to do so. The former allows for readiness, for the alignment of intention and action. The latter introduces a kind of dissonance, where the experience does not match the expectation, where the responsibility feels imposed rather than accepted. This distinction shapes how the experience is understood, both during and after it has passed. The failure, in this case, is not only in the breach of the rule, but in the response to that breach. The system did not adapt to correct itself. It did not create space for reconsideration or protection. Instead, it continued forward, carrying with it the consequences of what had gone wrong. For the school, this moment becomes another quiet indication of how structure can sometimes override intention. The rules, designed to protect, became constraints that limited the ability to respond effectively. The authority of the system remained intact, even as its purpose was undermined. When the event continued, when the student moved through each challenge, the situation became normalized in a way that obscured its origins. What had begun as an irregularity became part of the narrative of the tournament, its initial failure absorbed into the progression of events. Yet beneath this normalization, the reality remained unchanged. The student had been placed in harm's way by a system that could not correct itself, supported by structures that prioritize continuity over adjustment. The experience, though completed, carried with it the weight of that imbalance, a reminder that even well-defined rules can fail when they are not flexible enough to respond to the unexpected. And so, within the broader history of Hogwarts, this moment stands as an example of how protection can falter, not through absence, but through rigidity. It reveals that safety is not only about setting boundaries, but about maintaining the ability to adapt when those boundaries are crossed. Without that ability, even the clearest rules can become part of the problem they were meant to prevent. There are moments when challenge is presented as a measure of growth, when difficulty is framed as a path toward understanding. Within Hogwarts, this idea appears often in small ways, in lessons that require focus, in tasks that demand patience. These forms of challenge are shaped by guidance, designed to stretch ability without exceeding it. They exist within boundaries that allow for learning without placing students in harm beyond what can be managed. Yet there are other moments when challenge takes on a different form, one that moves beyond structured learning into something more immediate. During the tournament, the tasks set before the participants were not simply tests of knowledge or controlled demonstrations of skill. They were encounters with situations that carried real danger, shaped in ways that required direct confrontation rather than careful observation. The first of these challenges placed the participant in the presence of a creature whose nature was defined by power and unpredictability. It was not an abstract problem to be solved from a distance, but a living force that responded to movement, to intrusion, to anything that might be perceived as a threat. The environment in which this encounter took place was open, visible to those watching, yet controlled only in the sense that it had been prepared in advance. Once the task began, control shifted, no longer held entirely by those who had arranged it. For the student facing this moment, preparation could only go so far. Knowledge of spells, understanding of magical theory, these provided a foundation, yet the reality of standing before such a creature demanded something more. It required the ability to act within uncertainty, to respond to movement that could not be fully predicted. The difference between success and harm was not always clear, and the margin for error was narrow. Those who observed from a distance saw the challenge unfold as part of a larger event, a demonstration of skill and courage. The structure of the tournament framed it in this way, allowing the danger to be viewed through the lens of competition. Yet for the individual at the center, the experience was not one of spectacle, but of immediate presence, where each decision carried weight beyond its appearance. The second task shifted the environment, moving from open space to something less familiar. It introduced elements that were not easily controlled, conditions that altered perception and movement. The challenge was not only to act, but to endure, to navigate a space where time itself seemed to change, where the ordinary rhythm of breath and thought was affected by the surroundings. In such a setting, the student was required to rely not only on skill, but on resilience. The environment did not adapt to the participant. It remained constant in its nature, indifferent to the difficulty it presented. The safeguards that existed were not always visible, and the sense of isolation within the task created a distance between the participant and those who watched. The final challenge brought these elements together, combining complexity with unpredictability. It was not a single encounter, but a sequence of obstacles, each requiring its own response, each carrying its own risk. The path forward was not linear, and the nature of the challenge meant that preparation could not account for every possibility. Within this structure, the student moved through a space that was designed to test limits, yet those limits were not always clearly defined. The boundaries between challenge and danger became less distinct, as the tasks required engagement with forces that could not be fully controlled. The expectation was that the participant would navigate these conditions successfully, yet the conditions themselves did not guarantee safety. For the school, the existence of such tasks within its framework reflects a particular understanding of learning, one that values experience gained through direct encounter. Yet when those encounters involve elements that carry real risk, the distinction between learning and exposure becomes less certain. The student is no longer simply acquiring knowledge, but facing situations where the outcome is not entirely within their control. The presence of supervision, of observers and organizers, suggests that the situation is managed, that intervention is possible if needed. Yet the structure of the tasks often places the participant beyond immediate reach, creating a delay between action and response. In that delay, the responsibility for safety shifts, even if only briefly, to the student themselves. This shift is subtle but significant. It places the individual at the center of a situation that was designed for testing, not necessarily for protection. The support that exists is present, yet not always immediate, creating a space where the participant must rely on their own ability to navigate what unfolds. Over time, The experience of such challenges becomes part of the narrative of the school, remembered as moments of achievement, of courage demonstrated in the face of difficulty. Yet within that narrative, the risks that were present are not always fully acknowledged. They are absorbed into the idea of success, their significance softened by the outcome. For those who experience them directly, however, the memory is shaped not only by what was achieved, but by what was faced. The awareness of how close danger can come, how easily it can emerge within structured environments, becomes part of their understanding of what it means to be at Hogwarts. And so the tasks of the tournament remain as examples of how challenge can extend beyond its intended boundaries. They show that within the pursuit of growth, there is a need to consider not only what is learned, but what is risked. When that balance shifts too far, the experience moves from education into something less certain, leaving students to carry the weight of encounters that were never meant to be entirely their own. There are dangers that approach openly, and there are those that move quietly, taking the shape of something familiar. The latter are often the most difficult to recognize, not because they are more powerful, but because they do not appear as threats. They exist within the structure that is meant to protect, blending into it in a way that allows them to remain unnoticed. Within Hogwarts, the presence of a professor carries with it a certain authority. It is a role that is trusted, one that assumes knowledge, experience, and the ability to guide students through situations they have yet to encounter. When a teacher stands before a class, there is an understanding that what they present is grounded in truth, that their actions align with the purpose of the school itself. During the time of the tournament, this understanding was tested in a way that was not immediately visible. A professor, known for skill and experience, returned to the school under circumstances that seemed ordinary. His presence was accepted without question, his role established with the same confidence that accompanied all those who held such positions. To the students, he was a figure of guidance, someone whose lessons carried weight. Yet beneath this appearance was something else, something that had taken the place of what should have been. The identity presented was not genuine, but assumed, maintained through careful effort and constant attention. It required precision, an understanding of behavior and expectation, a willingness to exist within a role without revealing the truth beneath it. The systems in place at Hogwarts were not designed to detect this kind of intrusion. They were built to guard against external threats, to prevent entry by those who would force their way in. They did not account for someone who entered through acceptance, who was given a place within the structure itself. This allowed the deception to continue, not for a brief moment, but for an extended period, moving through the school without interruption. For the students, the experience of learning under this professor was not entirely without value. The lessons, though shaped by hidden intent, provided knowledge that was real, skills that could be applied beyond the classroom. This created a complexity that made the situation more difficult to understand. The presence that guided them was both helpful and harmful, offering instruction while pursuing a purpose that lay far outside the boundaries of education. The individual behind the disguise carried a different intention, one that did not align with the role he had assumed. His actions were directed not toward the growth of students, but toward a specific outcome, one that required patience and precision. The environment of the school provided the means to achieve this, its routines offering cover, its structure allowing for movement without suspicion. What becomes clear over time is the extent to which this deception relied on the trust inherent within the school. Students accepted what they were taught, responded to guidance without question, and moved through their days without considering that the authority before them might not be what it seemed. This trust, essential to the functioning of the institution, also became the means through which it was compromised. The adults within the school were not unaware of the possibility of danger. They understood that threats could arise, that vigilance was necessary. Yet their focus was often directed outward, toward what might approach from beyond the walls. The idea that such a threat could exist within, fully integrated into the structure, was not given the same level of attention. This created a gap, one that allowed the deception to persist. The professor moved through the year, fulfilling his role while advancing his hidden purpose. The absence of detection was not due to a lack of ability, but to the nature of the situation itself. The systems designed to protect did not extend to this form of intrusion. For the student who became the focus of this hidden intention, the experience was shaped by guidance that carried a deeper purpose. The lessons offered, the advice given, the opportunities created, all served to direct him toward a path that had been carefully constructed. What appeared as support was, in part, manipulation, guiding actions in ways that aligned with a plan not yet revealed. There is a particular kind of vulnerability that arises when guidance cannot be fully trusted. It is not immediately recognized, as the structure of the relationship remains intact. The student continues to learn, to respond, to engage, unaware of the influence shaping those experiences. The realization of what has occurred comes only later, when the full extent of the deception is revealed. When that moment arrives, it shifts the understanding of everything that came before. The lessons, the interactions, the trust that was given, all take on a different meaning. What was once seen as guidance becomes part of a larger pattern, one that extends beyond the classroom into something far more serious. The failure, in this case, lies not only in the presence of the individual, but in the inability to recognize him for what he was. The school, with all its knowledge and experience, did not detect the deception until it had already achieved its purpose. The protections in place, though effective in many ways, did not extend to the kind of threat that could take on a familiar form. When the truth is finally uncovered, the response is immediate. The deception is ended, the individual removed, and the immediate danger addressed. Yet the time during which it existed cannot be undone. The experiences of the students, shaped by that presence, remain as part of their understanding of the school. In the quiet that follows, there is a recognition of what has occurred, not always spoken, but understood. That even within a place defined by knowledge and protection, there are forms of danger that cannot be easily anticipated. That trust, while necessary, carries with it the possibility of being misplaced. And so, within the broader history of Hogwarts, this moment stands as a reminder that not all threats arrive from outside. Some take shape within, moving through familiar spaces, guided by the very structures that are meant to prevent them. It is a reminder that protection requires not only strength, but awareness, and that without it, even the most carefully constructed systems can be quietly undone. There are moments when the consequences of risk become undeniable, when what was once framed as challenge or tradition reveals its true cost. These moments do not arrive gradually. They appear suddenly, breaking through the structure that once contained them, leaving behind a clarity that cannot easily be set aside. During the final stage of the tournament, the atmosphere carried a sense of completion. The tasks had been faced, the challenges navigated, and what remained was the culmination of everything that had come before. For those watching, it was the closing of an event that had shaped the year, a moment that would determine outcome and recognition. The expectation was that it would end as it had continued, within the boundaries that had been established. Yet within that final challenge, something shifted. The environment itself, designed to test, became something else. A space where control was less certain than it appeared. The path forward was not only a matter of skill, but of navigating conditions that extended beyond what had been intended. The structure that had guided the event began to give way to something less predictable. For the students who reached the end, the moment carried a sense of shared experience, of having moved through the same trials, of standing at the threshold of completion. What followed was not the expected conclusion, but a transition into something far more dangerous. The boundary between the controlled environment of the tournament and the wider world dissolved, leaving them exposed to a threat that had not been part of the design. There is a difference between danger that is planned and danger that emerges without warning. The former, though serious, exists within a framework that allows for preparation and response. The latter arrives without that structure, leaving those present to face it without the support they might otherwise rely upon. In this moment, it was the latter that took hold. For one of the students, the encounter was immediate and final. The shift from challenge to harm occurred without time for understanding, without the space to react in a way that might have changed the outcome. The presence of danger, once contained within the idea of the tournament, became something real, something that could not be undone. The significance of this moment extends beyond the individual. It marks a point where the nature of the event itself is called into question, where the balance between challenge and safety is no longer abstract. The cost of maintaining that balance becomes visible, not through speculation, but through consequence. For those who remained, the experience was shaped by shock, by the sudden realization that what had been presented as controlled was not entirely so. The sense of safety that had surrounded the event was disrupted, replaced by an awareness that the boundaries had not held as intended. The structure that had guided the tournament could not account for what had occurred. The response that followed was immediate, yet it could not alter what had already happened. The student who had been lost could not be restored. The moment could not be reversed. What remained was the need to understand, to reconcile what had taken place with the framework that had allowed it to happen. Within the school, the impact was felt deeply, though not always expressed openly. The routines continued, the structure of daily life maintained, yet beneath this continuity lay a shift in perception. The tournament, once seen as a demonstration of skill and tradition, now carried a different meaning, one shaped by the awareness of its potential cost. The adults responsible for the school faced a different kind of responsibility in this moment. The event had been allowed, the safeguards put in place, yet the outcome revealed their limitations. The need to address what had occurred extended beyond the immediate, requiring reflection on the decisions that had led to this point. For the students, the lesson was not one that had been intended. It was not about competition or achievement, but about the reality of risk, the understanding that even within structured environments, outcomes cannot always be controlled. The presence of loss within the school altered the way those experiences were understood, adding a weight that could not be easily set aside. There is a quiet finality to such moments, a recognition that something has changed in a way that cannot be undone. The return to normalcy, when it comes, does not erase that change. It exists alongside it, shaped by it, carrying forward the memory of what has occurred. The event itself, though completed, is no longer the same. It becomes part of the history of the school, remembered not only for its challenges, but for the moment when those challenges gave way to something more serious. The tradition, once revived with the intention of connection and growth, now carries a different legacy. And so, within the broader story of Hogwarts, this moment stands as a turning point. It reveals the limits of control, the reality that even the most carefully structured events can be disrupted in ways that carry lasting consequences. It reminds us that safety, when assumed rather than ensured, can falter, and that when it does, the impact is felt not only in the present, but in the way the future is understood. There are moments when truth arrives clearly, without ambiguity, carried not by rumor or assumption, but by direct experience. In such moments, there is an expectation that understanding will follow, that what has been seen will be acknowledged, that those responsible for guiding others will respond with clarity. Yet there are times when this expectation is not met, when truth is not denied outright, but set aside, reshaped into something less certain. After the events that marked the end of the tournament, the reality of what had occurred was not difficult to understand for those who had witnessed it directly. The danger that had once seemed distant had revealed itself fully, its presence no longer something to be questioned or dismissed. For the student who returned, the experience carried with it a clarity that could not be easily softened. What had been seen, what had been faced, stood as undeniable. Yet beyond that immediate understanding, a different response began to take shape. Those outside the direct experience did not receive the truth in the same way. It was filtered, reconsidered, placed within a framework that allowed it to be viewed from a distance. The implications of what had occurred were not embraced fully, but held at arm's length, as though acknowledging them would introduce a change too significant to accept. Within Hogwarts, this created a quiet division, not one defined by open disagreement, but by differing perceptions of reality. Some held firmly to what had been witnessed, while others, influenced by authority and broader structures, accepted a version that softened the truth. This division did not always express itself openly, yet it shaped conversations, influenced trust, and altered the sense of shared understanding that the school once carried. The absence of clear acknowledgement carried its own consequences. When truth is not fully recognized, the response to it cannot fully take shape. Preparations that might have been made are delayed, discussions that might have brought clarity are avoided, and the sense of urgency that should accompany such knowledge is diminished. The result is not a return to safety, but a continuation of uncertainty. For the students, this uncertainty is difficult to navigate. They exist within a structure that is meant to provide guidance, yet the guidance itself is not aligned with what some know to be true. This creates a quiet tension, one that exists not in action, but in understanding. The world they are told about does not fully match the one they have begun to see. There is also the matter of trust. When those in positions of authority choose not to fully acknowledge what has occurred, it alters the relationship between guidance and belief. Students begin to question not only the specific information they are given, but the process through which it is shared. The confidence that once allowed them to accept instruction without hesitation becomes less certain, shaped by the awareness that truth can be withheld or reshaped. The decision to deny or diminish what has happened is not always made lightly. It often arises from a desire to maintain stability, to prevent fear from spreading, to protect the broader structure from disruption. Yet in doing so, it introduces a different kind of instability, one that exists beneath the surface, where uncertainty replaces clarity. Within the school, daily life continues. Lessons are taught, routines maintained, and the outward appearance of normalcy is preserved. Yet this continuity does not fully reflect the reality beneath it. The knowledge of what has occurred remains present, even when it is not openly discussed. It shapes the way students think, the way they observe, the way they respond to what they are told. For those who experience the truth directly, the situation carries a particular weight. They are asked, in subtle ways, to reconcile what they know with what is being presented. This is not a simple task. It requires holding two versions of reality at once, one grounded in experience, the other in authority. The tension between them does not resolve easily. The broader effect of this denial extends beyond a single moment. It influences how future events are approached, how warnings are interpreted, how seriously threats are taken. When truth is not fully acknowledged, the ability to respond effectively is diminished, as the foundation for action remains uncertain. There is a difference between protecting others from fear and protecting them from reality. The former may offer temporary comfort, but the latter requires honesty, even when that honesty carries weight. Within Hogwarts, the choice to soften the truth reflects an attempt to preserve stability, yet it does so at the cost of clarity. As time passes, the immediate intensity of the moment fades, but the underlying effect remains. The students continue their education, moving through their days with an awareness that is not always visible, but deeply felt. They understand, in a way that is not formally taught, that safety is not only about protection from external threats, but about the willingness to face what is real. And so, within the quiet continuation of school life, this moment becomes part of a larger pattern. It reveals that failure is not always found in action alone, but in the absence of it, in the choice to look away when clarity is needed. It is a reminder that truth, once revealed, cannot be undone, and that the way it is received shapes not only the present, but the future that follows. There are times when authority enters a place not as guidance, but as control, bringing with it a certainty that leaves little room for question. It arrives with rules already formed, with expectations that are not open to discussion, and with a belief that order must be maintained above all else. In such moments, the structure of a school can begin to shift, not through visible change in its walls, but through the way those within it are allowed to think, to speak, and to act. At Hogwarts, there came a period when this kind of authority took hold. It did not emerge from within the school itself, but from outside, carried by decisions that extended beyond the daily life of students and teachers. The presence that entered did so with the full weight of that external power, bringing with it a new way of defining what was acceptable and what was not. At first, the changes were subtle. New rules were introduced, small adjustments to routines that seemed, on the surface, to be about maintaining discipline. Yet beneath these adjustments lay a deeper intention, one that sought not only to regulate behavior, but to shape understanding. The boundaries of what could be said, what could be taught, and what could be questioned began to narrow, not through open prohibition, but through quiet enforcement. For the students, this shift was felt gradually. Lessons that had once encouraged curiosity became more constrained, focusing on theory without application, on repetition without exploration. The absence of practical learning was not immediately obvious, but over time, it created a gap between knowledge and experience. Students were being taught what to think, but not how to act. The presence of authority extended beyond the classroom. It reached into the spaces where students gathered, into conversations that had once been open and unguarded. Expressions of concern, questions about what was happening beyond the school, even simple discussions about recent events became subject to scrutiny. The freedom to speak was not removed entirely, but it was limited in ways that encouraged silence. Punishment, too, began to change in nature. It was no longer simply a response to behavior, but a means of reinforcement, a way of ensuring that the new expectations were not only understood, but internalized. The methods used carried a weight that went beyond correction, introducing an element of fear into situations that had once been governed by guidance. For those who experienced this directly, the effect was not only physical, but psychological. The act of being punished became tied to the suppression of thought, to the idea that certain truths should not be acknowledged, certain questions not asked. This created a conflict within the students, between what they knew or suspected and what they were allowed to express. The adults within the school were not untouched by this shift. Their roles, once defined by their own understanding of teaching and protection, became constrained by the new authority. Some adapted, finding ways to continue their work within the limits imposed. Others resisted quietly, offering support where they could without drawing attention. Yet the overall structure remained altered, shaped by forces that extended beyond their control. What makes this period particularly significant is not only the presence of strict authority, but the way it interacted with the existing environment of the school. Hogwarts, with its traditions and its sense of continuity, had always carried a certain independence, a belief in its ability to guide its students according to its own principles. The introduction of external control disrupted this balance, replacing autonomy with oversight. For the students, this disruption altered their understanding of what the school represented. It was no longer simply a place of learning, but a space where information was managed, where certain truths were withheld, and where questioning carried consequences. The sense of safety that had once been tied to knowledge became uncertain, as knowledge itself was limited. There were moments when this structure was challenged, when students sought ways to reclaim what had been restricted. These efforts were often quiet, taking place outside the formal framework of the school, guided by a desire to learn what was no longer being taught. In these spaces, the original purpose of education re-emerged, not through authority, but through shared effort. Yet these moments existed alongside the broader reality of control. The presence of authority remained constant, its influence shaping daily life in ways that could not be easily avoided. The tension between what was enforced and what was understood created a sense of division, one that did not always appear openly, but was felt in the way students moved through their days. Over time, the impact of this period became more evident. The absence of proper instruction, the suppression of open discussion, the use of punishment as a means of control, all contributed to an environment that differed sharply from what the school had once been. The failure was not in a single action, but in the accumulation of many, each one shaping the experience of those within it. When this period eventually came to an end, when the structures that had imposed such control were removed, the school began to shift back toward its previous form. Yet the memory of what had occurred did not disappear. It remained as part of the students' understanding, a recognition of how easily the balance between guidance and control can be altered. In the quiet that followed, there was a sense of restoration, of returning to something more familiar, but there was also an awareness, carried forward by those who had lived through it, that authority, when unchecked, can change the very nature of a place. It can transform a school from a space of learning into something more restrictive, more uncertain, and in doing so, place its students in a position where they must navigate not only what they are taught, but what they are not allowed to know. There are subjects within Hogwarts that carry a quiet urgency, lessons that are not simply part of a curriculum, but preparations for realities that exist beyond the walls of the school. Defense against the darker aspects of magic is one such subject, not because it is more important than others, but because of what it represents. It is meant to bridge the gap between knowledge and survival, to offer students the tools they may one day need when guidance is no longer present. In ordinary times, this subject is taught with a balance of theory and practice, allowing students to understand not only what exists, but how to respond to it. The classroom becomes a space where uncertainty can be explored safely, where mistakes can be corrected without lasting consequence. Within this structure, confidence grows gradually, shaped by repetition and understanding. Yet there came a time when this balance shifted, when the practical aspect of the subject was set aside, replaced by something more controlled. The lessons continued, but their focus changed. Instead of engaging with the material directly, students were asked to study it from a distance, to memorize definitions and descriptions without the opportunity to apply them. The subject remained in name, but its purpose began to fade. At first, the difference may not have been fully recognized. The structure of the classroom remained, the routines unchanged, and the presence of a teacher at the front provided a sense of continuity. Yet over time, the absence of practical engagement became more apparent. Students found themselves learning about defensive magic without experiencing it, understanding concepts without developing the ability to use them. This created a gap, one that extended beyond the classroom into the students' sense of readiness. The knowledge they acquired was incomplete, lacking the depth that comes from direct application. When faced with the idea of real danger, they were left with theory rather than experience, with understanding that had not been tested in a way that could build confidence. The reasons for this shift were not always explained in terms that made sense to those affected. The decision to limit practical learning was presented as necessary, as part of a broader effort to maintain order and control. Yet for the students, the effect was not one of safety, but of limitation. The subject that should have prepared them was no longer doing so. There is a difference between knowing what a spell does and being able to cast it under pressure. The former can be learned through reading and repetition. The latter requires practice, the kind that involves uncertainty, adjustment, and the gradual development of skill. Without this practice, the knowledge remains incomplete, unable to fully serve its purpose. For some students, this gap became too significant to ignore. The awareness that they were not being prepared in the way they needed led to a quiet response, one that took shape outside the formal structure of the school. They began to seek out opportunities to learn what was no longer being taught, to practice in ways that the classroom no longer allowed. These efforts were not organized in the traditional sense. They were guided by necessity, by the understanding that preparation could not be delayed. The space in which they occurred was informal, removed from the authority that had restricted their learning. Within this space, the balance between theory and practice began to return, not through official guidance, but through shared effort. What is notable about this response is not only that it occurred, but that it was needed at all. The responsibility for learning, particularly in a subject as critical as defense, had shifted from the institution to the students themselves. This shift was not intentional, yet it reflected a failure within the system, a gap between what was provided and what was required. The adults within the school were not entirely unaware of this situation. Some recognized the limitations of the current approach, understood the need for practical engagement, yet their ability to act was constrained, shaped by the broader structures that had altered the curriculum. The result was a situation where the need for learning existed alongside the inability to provide it fully. For the students, this created a dual experience. Within the classroom, they followed the expected routines, absorbing information without application. Outside of it, they sought to fill the gaps, to develop skills that would allow them to face situations beyond the school. This division between formal education and informal learning became a defining feature of that period. Over time, the effects of this absence became more evident. The lack of preparation was not always immediately visible, but it shaped the way students approached uncertainty, the way they understood their own abilities. Confidence, when built on incomplete knowledge, carries its own risks, creating a sense of readiness that may not fully align with reality. When the opportunity for proper instruction returned, when the balance between theory and practice was restored, the change was noticeable. The subject regained its depth, its purpose becoming clear once more. Yet the period of absence remained part of the student's experience, a reminder of what it meant to learn without the tools needed to apply that learning. Within the broader life of Hogwarts, this moment stands as an example of how easily the purpose of education can shift. When control replaces preparation, when structure overrides substance, the result is not safety, but limitation. The students, in seeking to overcome this limitation, reveal both the strength of their determination and the gap that should never have existed. And so, within the quiet continuation of lessons and routines, this period remains, not always spoken of directly, but understood. It reflects a time when the responsibility for learning moved beyond the institution, when students were left to prepare themselves in ways that should have been guided. In that space, they discovered not only the importance of knowledge, but the necessity of experience, and the difference between the two. There are times when a place built on its own traditions begins to shift under the influence of forces beyond its walls. These shifts are not always sudden, they arrive gradually, introduced through decisions that seem administrative rather than transformative. Yet over time, they reshape the structure of the school, altering not only how it functions, but how it is experienced by those within it. At Hogwarts, there came a period when authority from outside began to settle into the daily life of the castle. It did not replace the existing structure entirely, but it overlaid it, introducing new expectations, new forms of oversight, and a different understanding of control. The school, which had long operated with a sense of independence, found that independence quietly reduced, its decisions influenced by considerations that extended beyond its own walls. The changes were expressed through decrees, each one presented as a measure to improve order, to ensure that the school functioned in a way that aligned with broader authority. Individually, these decrees appeared manageable, adjustments to routine that did not immediately disrupt the flow of daily life. Yet as they accumulated, their effect became more pronounced, shaping the environment in ways that were difficult to ignore. For the students, this shift was experienced not through a single moment, but through a gradual narrowing of space. The freedom to move, to gather, to speak without consideration of oversight became more limited. Actions that had once been ordinary began to carry weight, as though each movement was subject to evaluation. The sense of being within a protected environment gave way to something more controlled, more observed. The presence of surveillance, both direct and implied, altered the atmosphere of the school. It was not always visible, yet it was felt in the way conversations became quieter, in the way students chose their words more carefully. The knowledge that actions could be reported, that behavior could be noted and addressed, created a subtle but persistent tension. This tension extended into the classroom, where the focus of learning continued to reflect the changes taking place. Subjects were taught within the boundaries set by external authority, their content shaped by what was permitted rather than what was necessary. The connection between knowledge and reality, already strained in some areas, became further complicated by these limitations. For the teachers, the experience was no less complex. Their role, once defined by their own understanding of education, became subject to oversight that restricted how they could guide their students. Some adapted, working within the constraints to provide what support they could. Others found their ability to teach limited in ways that affected not only their lessons, but their sense of purpose within the school. What becomes clear in such a situation is the delicate balance between autonomy and control. A school requires structure, guidance, and authority to function. Yet, when that authority is imposed from outside, without full alignment with the needs of those within, the result can be a disconnect, a gap between intention and effect. For the students, this disconnect shaped their experience in ways that were not always immediately visible. It influenced how they interacted with one another, how they approached their studies, and how they understood the role of the school itself. The idea of Hogwarts as a place of independent learning, of exploration guided by knowledge, became less certain, replaced by an awareness of boundaries that were not entirely its own. There were moments when this structure was quietly challenged, not through open defiance, but through small acts of persistence. Students found ways to maintain connections, to share ideas, to continue learning beyond the limits imposed. These acts did not remove the presence of control, but they revealed the resilience of those within it, their ability to adapt to conditions that were not ideal. Yet, even within this adaptation, the underlying issue remained. The school was no longer fully guided by its own principles, but by decisions that reflected a broader concern for order over understanding. The focus shifted from preparing students for the world they would face to maintaining a version of that world that could be more easily managed. Over time, the cumulative effect of these changes became more apparent. The sense of trust that had once defined the relationship between students and the institution began to shift. Authority was no longer seen solely as a source of guidance, but also as a force that could limit, that could shape experience in ways that did not always align with the needs of those it governed. When this period eventually came to an end, when the influence that had reshaped the school began to recede, the return to autonomy was not immediate. The structures that had been put in place did not simply disappear. Their effects lingered, carried forward in the way students and teachers understood what had occurred. There was a gradual restoration, a return to a sense of independence that felt both familiar and altered. The experience of living under such control had left its mark, shaping how authority was perceived, how trust was given, and how the purpose of the school was understood. In the quiet that followed, Hogwarts resumed its role as a place of learning shaped by its own traditions. Yet within its history, this period remained a reminder of how easily external influence can alter the balance of a system, how autonomy, once reduced, must be carefully rebuilt. And so, within the ongoing life of the school, this moment stands as a reflection of how authority, when extended beyond its intended scope, can transform not only the structure of an institution, but the experience of those within it. It reveals that protection and control, though often linked, are not the same, and that when one is mistaken for the other, the result is a place that feels less like a sanctuary and more like something to be endured. There are moments when action arises not from instruction, but from belief, when individuals move forward based on what they understand to be true. In such moments, the absence of clear guidance becomes as significant as the presence of danger itself. What follows is not a planned response, but a reaction shaped by urgency, by trust in what is perceived, and by the need to act before certainty can fully form. Within Hogwarts, there came a time when a vision, vivid and immediate, altered the course of events. It did not arrive as a question, but as something that felt real, something that demanded response. For the student who experienced it, the line between perception and reality was not easily drawn. What was seen carried weight, urgency, and the sense that waiting would only allow harm to unfold. In a situation where guidance should have been sought, there was instead a quiet absence. The structures that normally provided clarity were not fully available, shaped by restrictions that limited communication. The path that remained was one of individual decision, guided not by certainty, but by the belief that action was necessary. This belief extended beyond a single individual. Others were drawn into it, not through coercion, but through trust, through the shared understanding that something needed to be done. Together, they formed a response that was not directed by the institution, but by their own sense of responsibility. It was an act of determination, but also one of vulnerability, shaped by the limitations of what they knew. The journey that followed led them beyond the boundaries of the school, into a place where the environment itself carried a different kind of weight. It was not a space designed for learning or observation, but one shaped by forces that existed outside the structure of Hogwarts. The protections that had once surrounded them were no longer present, replaced by uncertainty and the need to navigate without guidance. For these students, the experience was immediate and real. The dangers they encountered were not theoretical, not something to be studied from a distance. They were present, active, requiring response in ways that exceeded what they had been formally taught. The absence of adult intervention, the lack of direct support, left them to rely on what they had learned and on each other. What makes this moment particularly significant is the way it reveals the gap between perception and reality. The vision that prompted their actions was not what it seemed. It was shaped by external influence, designed to lead them toward a specific outcome. The students, acting in good faith, were responding not to truth, but to something constructed to appear as truth. This distinction carries weight, not only in the moment, but in the understanding that follows. The realization that their actions were guided by something false does not diminish the intention behind them, but it highlights the vulnerability that exists when clarity is absent. Without accurate information, even the most well-intentioned response can lead into danger. The absence of institutional support during this time becomes more apparent in retrospect. The systems that should have provided guidance, that should have allowed for verification, were not fully accessible. The students acted because they believed they had to, because the structures around them did not offer a clear alternative. When the confrontation came, it did so without the balance that might have been expected. The students faced situations that required skill and composure, yet they were doing so without the preparation that would have been appropriate for such circumstances. Their knowledge, though genuine, was incomplete, shaped by experience rather than structured learning. The outcome, though ultimately resolved, carried with it a weight that extended beyond the immediate. It revealed not only the presence of danger, but the way in which that danger had been approached. The students had acted alone, not by choice, but by necessity, guided by belief rather than supported by certainty. For the school, this moment becomes a reflection of what happens when communication is limited, when authority restricts rather than guides, and when the absence of clarity leads to action that could have been avoided. It is not a failure of intention, but of structure, of the systems that should have supported those within them. The students returned, changed by what they had experienced. The understanding they carried was not only of the dangers they had faced, but of the conditions that had led them there. The recognition that they had acted without full knowledge, that they had been guided by something not entirely real, became part of their awareness. There is a quiet complexity in such moments, where courage and vulnerability exist together. The willingness to act, to respond to what seemed urgent, is not diminished by the outcome, yet it is shaped by the realization that the foundation for that action was incomplete. Within the broader history of Hogwarts, this event stands as an example of how easily the balance between guidance and independence can shift. It shows that when students are left without clear direction, they will find their own way, even if that way leads into uncertainty. And so, within the quiet continuation of the school's life, this moment remains, not always spoken of in full, but understood in its implications. It reflects a time when action arose from necessity rather than instruction, when students stepped beyond the boundaries of what they should have faced, and in doing so, revealed both their strength and the limits of the system meant to protect them. There are forms of protection that do not present themselves clearly, that exist beneath the surface of ordinary interaction, shaped by intention but obscured by behavior. In such cases, the presence of care is not always felt as such. It may appear instead as distance, as severity, as something difficult to understand from the outside. When protection takes this form, it creates a tension between what is given and what is perceived. Within Hogwarts, there was a figure whose role embodied this complexity. As a teacher, his presence in the classroom was marked not by warmth, but by strictness, by a manner that left little room for comfort. His expectations were precise, his responses often sharp, and his interactions with students carried a tone that could be unsettling. For many, the experience of being in his class was one of unease, shaped by the sense that they were being judged more than guided. This dynamic did not exist in isolation. It was reinforced by patterns that became familiar over time. Certain students were favored, others treated with a level of criticism that extended beyond simple correction. The distinction was not always subtle, and it shaped the way students understood their place within the classroom. Confidence, for some, was difficult to maintain under such conditions, as each mistake carried weight beyond its immediate context. Yet beneath this outward behavior, there existed something less visible. The role this teacher played within the broader structure of the school was not limited to instruction. It extended into areas that were not shared openly, responsibilities that required discretion, and actions that could not be fully understood by those observing from the outside. This created a divide between what was seen and what was intended, between the experience of the students and the purpose behind the behavior. For the students, however, the visible aspect of this presence was what defined their understanding. They encountered the teacher in the classroom, in moments of assessment and correction, where the tone was often critical, the feedback direct. In these interactions, there was little indication of anything beyond what was immediately expressed. The idea that such behavior might be connected to a form of protection was not something that could be easily perceived. This creates a particular kind of difficulty within an educational environment. A teacher is meant to guide, to support learning, to create conditions in which students can grow. When the approach taken instead introduces fear or discomfort, it alters the nature of that environment. Learning becomes intertwined with apprehension, and the process of understanding is shaped by the need to avoid negative response. Over time, this can affect not only individual students, but the broader atmosphere of the classroom. Participation becomes more cautious, questions less frequent, as the risk of error carries greater consequence. The balance between challenge and support shifts, leaning toward a structure where correction is emphasized more than growth. Yet the complexity remains, because the actions taken beyond the classroom suggest a different intention. The protection offered, though not visible, plays a role in shaping outcomes that extend far beyond daily lessons. It exists within a framework that requires secrecy that cannot be revealed without undermining its purpose. This creates a situation where the cost of protection is borne by those who are unaware of it. For the students, this cost is experienced directly. They navigate an environment where the presence of a teacher does not always feel safe, where guidance is delivered in a way that can discourage as much as it instructs. The lack of visible support shapes their perception, influencing how they engage with the subject, how they understand their own abilities. There are moments when the tension between these roles becomes more apparent, when the actions taken outside the classroom begin to influence what occurs within it. Yet even then, the connection is not always clear. The students see fragments, pieces of a larger picture that do not fully align. The result is an understanding that remains incomplete, shaped by experience but lacking context. When the broader truth of this situation is eventually revealed, it does not erase what has been felt. The knowledge that there was a deeper purpose behind certain actions provides explanation, but it does not remove the impact of those actions. The experiences within the classroom remain: the discomfort, the imbalance, the sense that guidance was not always offered in a way that supported growth. This reveals a fundamental tension within the role of protection. When it is hidden, when it cannot be expressed openly, it risks being misunderstood. The intention may be to safeguard, to influence events in a way that prevents greater harm, yet the immediate effect can be one of distance, of difficulty, of an environment that does not fully support those within it. For the school, this situation reflects a broader challenge: the need to balance secrecy and transparency, protection and guidance is not easily resolved. In choosing to prioritize one, there is often an effect on the other. The result is an experience that is shaped by both, yet fully aligned with neither. And so, within the life of Hogwarts, this presence becomes part of its complexity, a reminder that not all forms of care are easily recognized, and that not all forms of authority are experienced in the same way. It reveals that protection, when separated from understanding, can create its own form of distance, leaving students to interpret what they encounter without the context that would allow them to see it clearly. In the quiet continuation of lessons and routines, this dynamic remains, not always acknowledged, but present in the way students remember their experiences. It is a reflection of how intention and perception can diverge, and how, within that divergence, the purpose of education can be shaped in ways that are not always immediately understood. There are times when the dangers faced by students do not arrive suddenly, but take shape slowly, formed through pressure, expectation, and silence. These dangers are not always visible in the same way as others. They do not move through corridors or appear in direct confrontation. Instead, they exist within the individual, growing over time, shaped by forces that are not always addressed. Within Hogwarts, there was a student whose experience reflected this quieter form of risk. From the outside, his place within the school appeared secure. He was part of a known family, his identity shaped by a history that carried weight within the wider world. This history did not remain outside the school gates. It followed him, influencing how he was seen, how he understood himself, and what was expected of him. These expectations were not always spoken directly, yet they were present in the way others interacted with him, in the assumptions made about his character and future. Over time, they became part of his identity, something he carried even when he might not have fully understood their meaning. The environment of the school, divided into houses and shaped by reputation, reinforced these expectations, giving them a place to settle and grow. There came a point when these external pressures began to take on a more immediate form. The path before him was no longer shaped by curiosity or learning, but by obligation, by the sense that certain actions were required, regardless of their cost. For the student, this shift was not sudden. It unfolded gradually, altering the way he moved through the school, the way he engaged with others. His behavior changed, not always in ways that were immediately understood, but in patterns that suggested something deeper at work. Isolation grew, not always visible, but present in the spaces where connection once existed. The adults within the school were not entirely unaware of this change. There were moments when it could be seen in hesitation, in the way the student carried himself, in the tension that seemed to follow him. Yet these observations did not always lead to intervention. The reasons for this are complex, shaped by uncertainty, by the limits of what could be known, and by the structure of the school itself. There is a particular challenge in recognizing when a student is in need of support beyond what is offered in ordinary circumstances. The signs are not always clear, and the response requires a willingness to look beyond behavior into the conditions that shape it. In this case, that response did not fully take shape. The student remained within the system, his experience largely unaltered by the awareness that something was wrong. As the pressure upon him increased, so too did the weight of what he was expected to do. The school, which should have provided a space for reflection and growth, became instead a place where this burden was carried in silence. The absence of direct guidance, of intervention that might have altered his path, left him to navigate a situation that extended far beyond what he should have faced alone. There were moments when the consequences of this became more visible, when actions taken revealed the depth of the situation. These moments did not come without warning, yet they were not fully addressed before they reached a point of significance. The response, when it came, was shaped by the immediate need to prevent harm, rather than the earlier opportunity to prevent the situation from developing at all. For the student, the experience was defined not only by what he was asked to do, but by the isolation in which he carried it. The school, with all its structures and protections, did not provide the support needed to alter his course. The responsibility remained his, shaped by forces that extended beyond the reach of the institution. There is a difference between discipline and understanding, between addressing behavior and recognizing the conditions that produce it. In this case, the distinction was not fully realized. The focus remained on what was visible rather than what lay beneath, and in doing so, the opportunity for meaningful intervention was missed. When the situation reached its resolution, it did so under conditions that reflected both the gravity of what had occurred and the limits of what could be changed. The student's path had been shaped over time, influenced by factors that could not be easily undone in a single moment. The outcome, though it prevented further harm, did not erase the experience that had led to it. For the school, this moment stands as a reflection of how internal struggles can go unaddressed, how the presence of external influence can shape a student's experience in ways that are not immediately visible. It reveals that protection is not only about guarding against external threats, but about recognizing when a student is being shaped by forces that require support and intervention. The lesson here is not one of simple failure, but of complexity, of the need to look beyond surface understanding into the deeper conditions that define behavior. It is a reminder that students do not exist in isolation from the world beyond the school, and that the influence of that world can carry into the spaces meant to protect them. And so, within the ongoing life of Hogwarts, this story becomes part of its quiet history, not always spoken of in full, but understood in its implications. It reflects a moment when a student stood at the intersection of expectation and choice, without the support needed to navigate it, and in doing so, reveals the limits of a system that did not fully see what was unfolding until it had already taken shape. There are forms of knowledge that arrive through structured teaching, guided by intention, and shaped by those responsible for passing it on. These forms are measured, explained, and placed within a framework that allows them to be understood safely. Yet there are also forms of knowledge that exist outside this structure, left behind without context, discovered rather than taught. When such knowledge is encountered without guidance, it carries with it a different kind of risk, one that is not always immediately recognized. Within Hogwarts, there came a time when a student came into possession of something that did not belong to the present. It was not part of the official curriculum, not something offered by a teacher or included in a lesson. Instead, it was a record of another student's work, notes written in the margins of a book, instructions that altered what was already known. At first, it appeared to be a helpful resource, a way to improve understanding, to achieve results with greater ease. The guidance it offered was precise, detailed in a way that suggested experience and confidence. Instructions were followed, and the outcomes they produced were often more effective than those found in standard texts. For the student using it, this created a sense of advancement, the feeling of moving beyond the limits of ordinary learning. What had once required effort became simpler, what had been uncertain became clear. Yet this clarity came without explanation. The reasoning behind the changes, the nature of the methods, and the context in which they had been developed were not provided. The knowledge existed in isolation, separated from the conditions that had shaped it. This absence of context created a quiet gap, one that was not immediately visible, but present nonetheless. There is a difference between learning something fully and simply knowing how to replicate it. The former includes understanding, awareness of consequence, and the ability to adjust when conditions change. The latter offers only the result, without the depth that allows for responsible use. In relying on the notes within the book, the student began to move toward the second, guided by instruction that was effective but not fully understood. Over time, the influence of this knowledge extended beyond simple tasks. It began to shape decisions, to offer solutions that were not part of the standard approach. The student grew more confident in its use, trusting in its effectiveness without fully considering its origin. This trust, while understandable, carried with it a risk that had not yet been revealed. What makes this situation more complex is the nature of the knowledge itself. It was not inherently harmful in all cases. Much of it provided improvements, refinements that enhanced what was already known. Yet within it were elements that extended beyond these boundaries, instructions that carried consequences not immediately apparent, spells that were not part of any formal teaching. The presence of such knowledge within the school raises questions about oversight and responsibility. The book, containing these notes, had existed within the environment of Hogwarts without being fully examined. Its contents, though not widely known, were accessible to those who found it. The lack of awareness surrounding it allowed the knowledge it contained to remain unregulated, available without guidance. For the student, the turning point came not through gradual realization, but through a moment of immediate consequence. A spell, used without full understanding, produced an outcome that was far more severe than expected. The difference between intention and result became clear, not through instruction, but through experience. The knowledge that had seemed helpful revealed its other side, the part that had not been explained. This moment carried with it a weight that could not be easily set aside. The realization that something used without full understanding could cause such harm altered the way the student viewed what had been discovered. The confidence that had grown through success was replaced by uncertainty, by the awareness that knowledge without context is not complete. The response from the school, when the situation became known, addressed the immediate consequences. Yet it did not fully explore how the situation had developed. The focus remained on the action taken, rather than the conditions that had allowed it. The presence of the book, the absence of guidance, the reliance on unverified instruction, all contributed to the outcome, yet they were not all equally examined. There is a quiet lesson within this, one that extends beyond the specific event. It speaks to the nature of knowledge itself, to the importance of understanding not only how something works, but why. Without that understanding, even useful information can become dangerous, its application shaped by assumption rather than awareness. For the school, this moment reflects a gap between what is provided and what exists beyond that provision. The curriculum offers structure, guidance, and oversight, yet there are elements within the environment that fall outside this structure. When these elements are encountered, the responsibility shifts, often without preparation, to the student who discovers them. Over time, the experience becomes part of the student's understanding, shaping how knowledge is approached in the future. It introduces caution where there had been confidence, awareness where there had been assumption. The lesson is not taught through formal means, but through consequence, through the recognition of what can happen when understanding is incomplete. And so, within the quiet continuation of learning at Hogwarts, this moment stands as a reminder that not all knowledge is equal, and that the way it is acquired matters as much as the knowledge itself. It reveals that guidance is not only about providing information, but about ensuring that it is understood, that its use is shaped by awareness rather than convenience. In the space between discovery and understanding, there is always a possibility of error. When that space is left unexamined, when knowledge is taken without context, the outcome can extend beyond intention. It is in this space that the responsibility of the school becomes most clear, not only to teach, but to ensure that what is learned can be used safely, with the depth and care it requires. There are moments when the sense of safety within Hogwarts shifts, not gradually, but all at once, when what was once assumed to be secure reveals itself to be uncertain. These moments do not begin with noise or disruption. They begin quietly, with small changes that pass without immediate notice, until they reach a point where the structure can no longer hold as it once did. On one such night, the castle continued in its usual rhythm. Students moved through corridors, lessons had ended, and the quiet of evening settled across the grounds. There was no clear indication that anything beyond the ordinary was about to unfold. The sense of continuity remained intact, the belief that the walls of Hogwarts still held their purpose. Yet beneath this calm, something had already begun to change. The boundaries that protected the school were not as firm as they had seemed. Forces from outside had found their way within, not through open confrontation, but through means that had not been fully anticipated. The presence of danger was no longer distant. It had entered the space that was meant to keep it out. For the students, the first awareness came not through explanation, but through disruption. The familiar became uncertain, the corridors no longer entirely safe, the sense of order replaced by something less defined. The castle, which had always seemed to contain what lay beyond it, now carried that presence within its own walls. What makes this moment particularly significant is not only the breach itself, but the way it unfolded. The response was not immediate in the way one might expect. There was awareness. There were efforts to address what was happening. Yet the scale of the situation extended beyond what could be quickly controlled. The balance between protection and vulnerability shifted, and within that shift, students found themselves closer to danger than they had ever been before. At the center of this moment was a figure whose presence had long defined the school. His role had been one of guidance, of authority grounded in understanding, a constant within the changing experiences of those who passed through Hogwarts. To the students, he represented stability, the assurance that whatever uncertainties existed, there was someone who could navigate them. The events that followed altered this perception in a way that could not be easily undone. The confrontation that took place did not occur in isolation. It was part of a larger movement, one that had brought danger into the heart of the school. The outcome of that confrontation was not only personal, but symbolic, marking a shift in what Hogwarts represented. For the students who witnessed or learned of what had occurred, the effect was immediate. The sense of safety that had once been tied to the presence of this figure was disrupted. The realization that even he could not prevent what had happened introduced a new understanding, one that extended beyond the specific event into the broader nature of the school itself. The presence of those who had entered the castle did not end with a single moment. It carried forward into the awareness that the boundaries had been crossed, that the protections in place were not absolute, The idea of Hogwarts as a sanctuary became more complex, shaped by the recognition that it could be reached, that its walls were not beyond the influence of the wider world. For the adults within the school, the response required a different kind of action. The situation had moved beyond containment into something that demanded resolution, not only in the immediate sense, but in how the school would move forward. The loss that had occurred was not something that could be addressed through routine measures. It required acknowledgement, reflection, and a reconsideration of what had allowed it to happen. For the students, however, the experience was not defined by these larger considerations. It was shaped by what they felt, by the shift in their environment, by the awareness that something fundamental had changed. The castle, which had always seemed steady, now carried a different weight, one that could not be easily explained, but was deeply understood. There is a particular kind of silence that follows such moments, not empty, but filled with the recognition of what has been lost. It settles into the spaces where certainty once existed, altering the way those spaces are experienced. The return to routine, when it comes, does not erase this silence. It exists alongside it, a quiet presence that remains. Over time, the school continues, as it always has. Lessons resume, students move forward, and the structure of daily life is restored. Yet, within that continuation, there is an awareness that was not there before. The understanding that safety, once assumed, is not unbreakable, that protection, while real, has its limit. This moment becomes part of the memory of Hogwarts, not only as an event, but as a turning point in how the school is understood. It marks the point where the distance between the castle and the dangers beyond it is no longer certain, where the boundary that once seemed clear becomes something that must be reconsidered. And so, within the quiet life of the school that follows, this memory remains, shaping the way students and teachers alike move through its halls. It is not always spoken of directly, but it is present, carried in the understanding that even the strongest protections can falter, and that when they do, the impact is felt not only in what is lost, but in how everything that remains is seen. There are times when the structure of a school changes so completely that it no longer resembles what it once was. These changes do not always come through visible destruction or sudden upheaval. Instead, they arrive through control, through the quiet replacement of guidance with enforcement, until the environment itself begins to feel unfamiliar to those who remain within it. At Hogwarts, there came a period when the authority that shaped daily life was no longer aligned with learning, but with obedience. The castle still stood, its corridors unchanged, its classrooms intact, yet the purpose that defined those spaces had shifted. The school continued in form, but its function had been altered in ways that reached into every part of the student experience. For the students who returned, the change was immediate. The expectations placed upon them were no longer about understanding or growth, but about compliance. Lessons were not opportunities to learn, but moments where certain ideas were enforced, where disagreement carried consequences. The balance between teaching and control had been replaced by something more rigid, more absolute. The presence of those in authority within the school reflected this shift. Their role was not to guide, but to ensure that the new expectations were followed without question. Their methods were direct, leaving little room for interpretation, and their actions reinforced the understanding that deviation from what was required would not be tolerated. Punishment, during this time, took on a different form. It was no longer simply corrective, but demonstrative, a way of reinforcing control through example. Students were not only corrected, but made to participate in the enforcement of these rules, placing them in positions that conflicted with the purpose of their education. The experience of learning became intertwined with fear, altering the way students engaged with the school. For those who lived through this period, the sense of safety that had once defined Hogwarts was no longer present. The castle, which had been a place of protection, became something to navigate carefully, where each action carried weight and where trust was no longer easily given. The familiar routines remained, but they existed within a different framework, one that shaped every interaction. The adults who remained within the school faced their own challenges. Their ability to guide and protect was limited, constrained by the authority that had taken control. Some found ways to resist quietly, offering support where they could without drawing attention. Others were unable to act at all, their roles reduced to maintaining the structure that had been imposed. This created a division within the school, not always visible, but deeply felt. There were those who enforced the new order, those who resisted it, and those who simply endured it, moving through their days with the understanding that their actions were no longer entirely their own. The unity that had once existed within the school gave way to something more fragmented, shaped by the conditions of the time. For the students, the experience was not only one of restriction, but of adaptation. They learned to move within the limits placed upon them, to find small ways to maintain their sense of self within an environment that sought to define it. These acts of resilience were often quiet, unnoticed by those who enforced the rules. Yet they played a crucial role in preserving what the school had once represented. There is a particular weight to a place of learning when it becomes a place of control. The purpose of education, which is to expand understanding and encourage growth, is replaced by something more limited, more focused on maintaining order than fostering knowledge. This shift does not erase the structure of the school, but it changes its meaning. Over time, the impact of this period became clear. The students who lived through it carried with them an understanding of what it meant for a place of safety to be transformed, for guidance to be replaced by enforcement. The lessons they learned were not those intended by the institution, but those shaped by experience, by the need to navigate an environment that did not support them in the way it should have. When this period came to an end, when the authority that had reshaped the school was removed, the return to what had been was not immediate. The effects of control do not disappear at once. They linger in the way students respond, in the way trust is rebuilt, in the understanding that what was once certain can be altered. The restoration of the school required more than the removal of those who had imposed the changes. It required a re-establishment of purpose, a return to the idea that Hogwarts existed to guide and protect, not to control. This process, though gradual, marked the beginning of a shift back toward what the school had once been. Yet the memory of that time remained. It became part of the history of Hogwarts, not only as a period of change, but as a reminder of how easily the balance between guidance and control can be disrupted. It showed that the strength of an institution lies not only in its structure, but in the purpose that guides it. And so, within the quiet continuation of life at the school, this moment stands as a reflection of what happens when that purpose is lost. It reminds us that a place of learning must remain rooted in understanding, that when it is shaped by control instead, it becomes something else entirely, leaving those within it to endure rather than to grow. There are moments when the purpose of a place changes completely, when what was once built for learning becomes something else entirely. These moments do not erase what came before, but they alter it, reshaping the meaning of every corridor, every room, every familiar space. Within Hogwarts, there came a time when the school itself became the setting for something it was never meant to be. The shift did not happen all at once. It emerged from a series of events that had already begun to move beyond the boundaries of the school, drawing it into a larger conflict that could no longer be kept at a distance. The dangers that had once been contained, or at least held at the edge, now approached directly, not as isolated incidents, but as part of something broader and more final. For the students who remained, the understanding of what was happening came with a quiet certainty. The routines that had defined their days were no longer enough. The lessons, the structure, the sense of gradual learning had been replaced by the awareness that something immediate was approaching. The school, which had once prepared them for the world beyond its walls, now brought that world directly inside. There were opportunities to leave, to step away from what was coming, yet not all chose to do so. Some remained, guided by a sense of responsibility, by the belief that the place which had shaped them was worth defending. This choice was not made lightly. It carried with it the understanding that what lay ahead would not resemble anything they had previously experienced. The castle itself, so often described as protective, became a different kind of space. Its walls no longer served only to keep danger out, but to hold those within as events unfolded. The familiar architecture, once associated with safety, now framed something far more uncertain. Classrooms, corridors, and halls were no longer simply places of learning, but positions within a larger confrontation. For those who took part, the experience was immediate and unstructured. There were no lessons to guide them, no measured progression from one level of understanding to another. The knowledge they had gained over the years was now tested in ways that could not be anticipated, requiring action rather than reflection, response rather than study. What is most striking about this moment is not only the presence of danger, but the role students were required to play within it. They were no longer observers or learners. They became participants in something that extended far beyond their education, facing situations that demanded a level of readiness that could not have been fully developed within the confines of a school. The adults within Hogwarts were present, guiding where they could, offering support within the limits of what was possible. Yet the scale of the situation meant that responsibility was shared in ways that were not typical. The distinction between teacher and student became less defined, as all were drawn into the same reality, shaped by the same immediate concerns. For the students, this represented a culmination of everything they had experienced. The lessons, the challenges, the moments of uncertainty and growth, all converged into a single point where knowledge met reality. Yet this convergence carried with it a weight that could not be ignored. It was not simply a demonstration of what they had learned, but an exposure to what they had not been meant to face so soon. There is a difference between being prepared for something and being placed within it. The former allows for understanding to develop gradually. The latter demands immediate action without the same foundation. In this moment, the students of Hogwarts were placed within something that required both, yet could only rely on what they had already gained. The consequences of this were not limited to the immediate experience. They extended into what was lost, into the absence left behind when the moment had passed. The castle, though still standing, carried the marks of what had occurred, not only in its structure, but in the memories of those who had been there. When the conflict ended, when the immediate danger receded, there was a return to stillness. The school, which had been transformed into something else, began to settle back into its original purpose. Yet this return was not complete. The experience of what had occurred remained, shaping how the school was understood by those who had lived through it. For the students, the sense of safety that had once defined Hogwarts could not be restored in the same way. It was not that the school had lost its protective qualities entirely, but that the understanding of those qualities had changed. They had seen the limits, experienced the moments when protection was not enough, when they were required to stand within danger rather than behind it. This understanding did not erase what Hogwarts had been, but it added to it, creating a more complex picture of what the school represented. It was still a place of learning, of growth, of connection. Yet it was also a place where the boundaries between safety and risk had been crossed, where students had been asked to carry more than they should have. And so, within the quiet that follows, the castle remains, its halls once again filled with the sounds of ordinary life. Lessons resume, routines return, and new students arrive, stepping into a place that still holds its sense of wonder. Yet beneath that surface, there is a history that cannot be fully separated from what the school is. It is a history that reflects not only the magic that defines Hogwarts, but the moments when that magic was not enough to shield those within it. It reminds us that even the most extraordinary places are shaped by the choices made within them, and that those choices, whether careful or flawed, leave their mark on all who pass through. In this way, the story of Hogwarts is not only one of enchantment and discovery, but of responsibility, of the balance between protection and exposure. And in the final moment of that balance, when the school itself became a place of open conflict, it revealed something essential, that even within its walls, safety is not absolute, and that those who learn there may one day be asked to face far more than they were ever meant to endure. And so, as the corridors of Hogwarts fall quiet once more, what remains is not only the memory of magic, but the echo of moments when that magic was not enough. Within those stone walls, students learned far more than spells and theory. They learned what it meant to stand in uncertainty, to face what should have been kept from them, and to carry burdens that arrived too early. The castle endures, unchanged in appearance, its towers still reaching upward, its halls still filled with light, yet its history lingers beneath the surface, woven into every staircase and doorway. It is a place of wonder, but also a place shaped by decisions, by silence, by moments when protection faltered. As you rest, let these memories settle gently, not as something heavy, but as something distant. The story continues, as it always does, carried forward by those who walk its halls. And in that quiet continuation, there remains the hope that learning, in all its forms, will one day be enough to protect those who seek it.